All right, cool guys. So let me get my notes up and we'll get started. We open our scene with a montage of images and horrific, uh, a pantomime of horrific scenes in our mind as we go there and we return to Claudius Giovanni's manor on the night of this feast and this supper that these unawares mortals of different backgrounds and lives all across Europe were invited to. We see first Gman laying unconscious, blood pouring from his mouth in the basement of that dungeon. We see hands reaching down and scooping him from the ground, hands that are robed in white. We see servants carrying his body up the stairs, out of the room. And next we flash to the feast table where he is being placed very gently and with great care into his seat, with his head being laid upon the table, blood being wiped from his lips, and the servants attending to him with all the care that they might give to one of the Lord's family, straightening his hair and carrying away his weapon. We see Saga and her sire. We see flashes of them running across the rooftops like wild animals. And in slow motion, we see her face just twisted into terror, white, milk white, and pale, and her wide eyes, and her hair flowing in the breeze, and we see Lady Demetra's fearsome visage. We see Saga pause and whirl around as she reaches the edge of the roof. She sees no one there. And from a nearby window that is open, we see servants poking their heads out to look at her, telling her that dinner is served, reaching out to take her by the hand, still shaking like a leaf in autumn, bringing her back into the manor. We see her suddenly lose heart and begin resist and screaming violently, and we see the servants reach out and drag her back into the manor. We switch scene and we see Valentino curled up upon the floor, shaking in pain. We see fresh licks of the lash opening up on his face, or opened up rather. Stripes of blood that drip down. His back has been lashed as well. We see his fine clothes gashed in long, jagged lines, soaked and dampened with blood of wounds that have opened up underneath, even through the cloth. We see Lady Jadwiga coiling that whip around her doughy fist, looking down with just the slightest hint of contempt in her face. We see the servants picking Valentino up from the floor, helping him back to his feet. We see the pain in Valentino. And they walk him to his seat, sitting him down next to that expensive brandy he had been drinking only a few minutes before. We switch scene and we see down in the bowels of Claudius Giovanni's manor, we see the blackness of the interior of the coffin where Giulietta was left, with the fresh corpse underneath her, a quickly cooling body, and the earth being piled atop her. We see her screaming in the darkness and pounding against the lid of the coffin. and a sudden explosion of light as the lid gives way and bits of earth fall in as the coffin lid creaks open. We see her looking up out of the open grave, which has been freshly dug up once more, and the servants that are crowded around the mouth of that grave, holding tapers in the soft glow piercing Julietta's face, and we see her face streaked in blood and caked in dirt, her eyes squinting painfully against that light. Lovely, and yet now victimized, her eyes wide with fear. We see their hands reaching down and pulling her out of the grave. We see them escorting her along, walking out of that place of death. Her gown is spattered in blood. Her hair is tousled. And we see them walk by that dark room she had been before, with that table and that mallet, and we see the table. We see Julietta's face as she can't help but look at that table as the servants walk her by. We see the table is clean, with no gold, no dead cat, no blood, only a mallet, and several deep, deep marks into the wood, as though someone had hammered into it. We see Julietta's dazed, dreamlike expression of horror and confusion. And then she is ushered along. We see her being sat down at the table along with everyone else, and the camera pans out as we switch scene, and we see Vukar, or not Vukar, I'm sorry. We see Diego, who is upstairs painting, and we see the slow motion of the agony in his face as his face is gripped by the withered hands of Venceslas, and the whispers in his ear, and the bloody painting before him, an architecture that is now streaked in his own blood, and the glass that glitters upon the floor in the light of the tapers. And we see the door to the chamber being opened at the apex of his agony, and the servants calling to them, saying that dinner is served. We see Diego gingerly stepping out of these shards of the broken goblet at his feet. We see the blood that drips down his face, much like Christ must have looked with his face cut with a crown of thorns. We see him moved along by the servants, walking down the stairs with Venceslas and his eerie smile following closely after. And it is here that we open up into the banquet hall as we begin our scene. The table in the dimly lit dining hall is laid out with expensive crockery in a manner befitting a prince. The room is abuzz with excitement. We see all the hosts gathered, sitting next to their guests. They're talking animatedly, chatting eagerly with one another. A few are even speaking with their guests. You see Lady Demetra is notably ignoring Saga, who sits next to her, her face blank and frozen into a look of perpetual terror. All of you look in some distress, sharp contrast to the excited guests, or the excited hosts that sit next to you. Garamond is still unconscious, slumped over the table. We see Lothar scurrying about the chamber, fussing over the settings and making sure everything is in order. The camera shifts briefly to the face of each horrified guest. As we look first to Julietta, who is sat down upon her chair next to Lady Theophana, and Theophana has whispered to you, Julietta, she has said that you smell like death, and you smell so wonderful now. As the camera focuses in on Julietta, what are we seeing?
Julietta has a look of
And we begin our next scene. As the hosts and the victims, for that occurs to all of you now that is what you are, assemble, the musicians play Claudius's theme, and we see those musicians frozen into their caricature of their art, staring ahead with glassy eyes, playing his music to greet and honor the lord of this place as the doors open at the head of the hall, and we see Lothar bowing, genuflecting before his lord as Claudius Giovanni walks through. To great fanfare, the other hosts rise and they clap for him as he smiles and lifts a hand to all of them, while the rest of you sit there in muted silence. And it is at this time that Gman stirs from his repose, from his unconsciousness. Gman, you awake to a throbbing in your head and the noise of the cheering, which is like a muted buzz somewhere in the back, as something in your head feels cracked. You have known injury before, but you are familiar and intimate with it enough to know that you are badly injured. As you stir, and as the camera focuses in briefly on Gman sitting there, stirring out of his repose amidst the others standing nearby, go ahead and tell us what we see.
As Gman starts to move in his seat, his arms start to move across the table, and his fingers start to try to dig and grab something on the table as he just rakes it down, and he lifts his head slowly, visions blurred, and his ears are ringing. He tries to look at his scenario and where he's at. He did not expect to awake ever again. Maybe perhaps in the house of the Lord, but not here again. He looks around very slowly, as if a wounded animal would, seeing all the hosts and the people he came here with.
We see that Gman's cheek is split, as well as his lip. We see the angry red of fresh bruises on his face blooming across his grizzled visage. We see the look in his eyes as he looks around the room, and as the camera pans back to Lord Giovanni, who is doing a sweeping turn with his guest Mariana on his arm. Mariana looks frozen, her countenance in mute horror, eyes wide, staring off into the distance, gently guided by Lord Giovanni on his arm. She walks as a woman in a dream. He eventually takes his place at the head of the table next to her, and you notice, any watching, that he guides her towards the chair and with a gentle hand seats her. Next, after him, the hosts take their seats. And at this moment, Lothar leads 3 servants, pushing huge, steaming carts heaped high with platters of delicious-smelling food. Roast duck, suckling pig, haunches of beef and legs of lamb. They all produce a mouth-watering aroma that fills every corner of the room as the doors at either end of the hall are opened, and we see those carts being pushed through and the servants cloaked in their white robes. And at this, as we switch, we'll begin our scene. As the food enters the room and that divine aroma fills the air, we see Lady Jadwiga at the far end of the table. She rises out of her seat, in her sweeping, flowing black dress and calls out above the clamor, "A toast! A toast to the brilliant one who has brought us together for such a delightful evening. A toast to the leader who knew how to add flavor to our dining. A toast to the one clever enough to attack his own kin for our benefit. To Claudius Giovanni, and to the destruction of Japheth, son of Cappadocius." And at that, a great cheer arises from the crowd. "Speech!" they cry. "Speech!" as they clap. And you see each host next to you. Perhaps the only one muted in his excitement is Marquettis, who is currently looking directly at you, Gehrman. You see he's sitting next to you. He's not clapping, but he's affixing you with his gaze and smiling his wolfish smile. And as they cry out and clap, Claudius rises and motions for silence. The festive crowd takes its time in quieting, but soon the roar subsides as he smiles as though their adulation of him is quite unnecessary, and yet clearly has the look of a man enjoying it. "Welcome, welcome, my true friends. Another year has passed, and the conspiracy of Isaac now stands on the threshold of victory. Your unflagging devotion to our cause has brought us to the brink of seizing Cappadocian power and wealth. I am in awe. Tonight I intend to reward that fidelity, which brings us to our guests." He gestures towards each of you. "Welcome, you who are new to our ranks. Let us talk about sustenance. Let us talk about the draught of life that sustains all of us." He motions to the carts as the servants stand by. "The smell of fine food entices and excites the palate, and makes the consumption all the more gratifying. Can you smell it, does it not? The growing anticipation make the meal more and more desirable. This is the difference between the boorish peasant who devours his barley like a beast, and the refined palate requiring cultivated sustenance, anticipation. The circumstances of the meal are as important as the food itself. Consumption is a holy act, and each drop should be memorable. Only the finest food should be selected. The food should be tenderized, prepared. The eater must have a relationship with his meal. Then, when you bite a shred of flesh from your food, it's worth the blood you shed. Wouldn't our guests agree?" And to your horror, Valentino, you see that Giovanni has looked directly at you as though expecting a reply.
Valentino is still in a pained daze, and he knows what he's referring to, and so Valentino, still with only his with one eye barely open, he looks down in shame and silence.
And as Valentino looks down, Claudius titters and shifts his gaze to Gehrman, briefly passing over him, looking at him pointedly. Gehrman, the camera is focused on you.
As Gehrman looks up at Claudius Giovanni, still hunched over on the table with one arm kind of supporting him, he quickly is looking around for utensils, knives, and without hiding the fact at all, he quickly with his right hand reaches towards his belt where his dagger has been for years, only to find that its holster is empty. As he breathes heavy and he can't seem to find a weapon.
Claudius smiles and turns his attention upon the other end of the table, where Julieta is sitting next to Lady Theophana. He is looking at you, Julieta, you realize, with a bolt of panic that goes through you, sharp like a knife.
Julieta catches his gaze, and it's taking all of her strength not to vomit. I don't know if you want me to roll for that, because the smell of the food and the smell of herself is just mixing and mingling into her nostrils, and she's about ready to hurl.
No, absolutely. Make a stamina roll. Difficulty will be 6.
Just stamina.
Oh, yeah.
And this is public, right?
Yep, it's a physical roll.
Okay. Sorry, I don't think I put me as...
Oh, it's all right. I forgot to remind everybody to switch over to their characters. But with one success, you just barely managed to swallow that gorge rising in the back of your throat, Julieta. Go ahead, describe for us what we're seeing.
Julieta, her pale, cold hands kind of go down to her skirts, and she holds some of the cloth tightly. Her knuckles turning pale as she kind of looks over to the side, away from everyone, and she just barely is able to swallow down the feel of vomit coming up in her throat, and she can't even look at the food, or anyone else for that matter, that's about to be served to them. And she looked pale before, but she looks deathly pale at this point, and it's just taking all of her strength and composure not to vomit on Lord Giovanni's floor.
And as Julieta rocks in her seat with illness, looking an odd milk color in her face, clearly the look of someone who is very sick, Lord Giovanni smiles cruelly and turns his gaze to Diego at the far end of the table. Diego, you realize that your host is looking at you. And what of you?
Diego is still laughing inwardly at the fact that they were putting on pretense by actually bringing out food here. He didn't think they actually were going to feed him, so he even chuckled a little bit, probably low enough that his master, his patron, couldn't hear him. But now, with Giovanni's eyes turned on him, all he can do is look him back in the eyes. He has a deep resignation etched into his face. He says, "The priest was right," and that is all.
Lord Giovanni's laughter rises from his throat, and the other hosts laugh along with him. They titter politely. Lord Giovanni eventually glances towards the carts and then motions at the far end of the door. We see Lothar as he ushers in 2 servants, also clad in white, dragging a large and noisy sheep to the table. There's a silken lash wrapped around its throat that it is being pulled upon by the servants. It is resisting and bleeding stubbornly. The sheep is pulling against the servants as they drag it into the hall, its hooves scraping against the stone floor. "He has spirit," says Claudius. "How unlike his breed. Well, my guests," as he looks to you, "here is your dinner." The camera is going to focus on the guests this evening as they have reaction to this lamb that is being dragged into the dining hall.
Valentino kind of looks over and gestures. "What is this? What now do you have for us?"
Claudius smiles. "Nothing more than your dinner." Come, come. And he motions at the rest of you. What are the rest of you doing?
Diego scoffs. If this is dinner, then what is that? And he'll nod to the trays.
Well, that is already been prepared. Come, did you want a temperate, bloodless dinner? What is Julieta and Gman doing?
Julieta slowly lifts her head up, and her dark lashes bash forward over towards where they're dragging the animal inside, and she is trying to control her body because she feels that she is giving into her fear and her anxiety, and her lips are dry as she tries to swallow down the lump that just keeps forming there, and her hands are shaking beneath the table on her skirts. She's just very, very scared and very confused. She doesn't know what's going on or what's real.
The camera pans to Gman.
Just still slumped in his chair. He's gonna lean back and let the back of the chair kind of support him as he still breathes heavy and very low. He uses all the breath he still has. It seems he's muttering prayers under his breath.
Lord Giovanni is looking at you, Gman. You, most of all, churchmen, should know. Eating is destruction. Eating is death. And death is holy, as our Savior reminds us. Come now. He reaches out a hand to one of the servants, and you see them move forward, the white robe billowing around their steps as they cross the hall. They pass by Lothar, who some of you might see standing there near the lamb, smiling an infuriating smile of smug satisfaction. The servant that walks forward at Giovanni's beckoning is holding a large axe and handing it to the lord of the manor. Lord Giovanni takes the axe. Who among you, as he points the head of the axe as though it were the scepter of a ruler, pointing at his subjects, shall have the honor of the kill? The lamb is the only thing that breaks the silence that has fallen over this hall, bleeding stubbornly. Even the musicians have stopped their playing.
Valentino. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all right. Go ahead.
Valentino stands up in defiance and anger and frustration and just slams his hand down on the table. Give it to me. I would be done with this.
As Valentino rises to volunteer, what are the rest of you doing?
Julieta looks over at Valentino, and she sees him reaching out his hand for the axe, and it's only then that she sees him. She noticed him when they first arrived, but she sees now what has happened to him and the lacerations all over him, and it just instills more fear into her as to what has happened to everyone else at this table.
Diego just nods solemnly and sees what will happen.
Gman is going to lurch forward and using his hands to kind of catch him on the table. He's going to try and use his biceps and his arms to try and push himself up to his feet. I would have it.
And as you try to rise, Gman, your legs shake horribly as pain rocks through your body. Clearly, you got the worst of it of anyone here. Go ahead and make a stamina roll to see if you can even rise to your feet, as wounded as you are. It will be at a reduced difficulty for you, however, difficulty 5. Though you are deeply wounded, you do manage to rise to your feet, and as Valentino and Gehrman both are standing, asking for the axe, Lord Giovanni looks at you, Gehrman. Oh, come now. I think we all saw the last time a weapon was placed into the churchman's hands. And the rest of the guests, or the hosts, rather, begin laughing along with Lord Giovanni, and you feel, Gehrman, Marquette's hand reach up and grip you on your shoulder in its iron grasp and begin forcing you back down to your seat. Sit down, Gehrman. Do you resist?
Yes, Gman will try to shirk off and pull away from his arm.
Okay,
as he tries to fight him.
We're gonna do a straight strength roll.
As this is going on, Julietta, her hands are so fiercely holding her skirts underneath the table that she realizes that her fingers knock into the stiletto that she had brought with her. It's in her skirts.
Although you struggle to resist him, Gehrman, Marquette's, his force in his arms and his hand is like the force of an iron weight, which is crushing down on your shoulder. And despite your best attempts to resist him, you are forced back down to your seat as you struggle and tear and lose balance as you find yourself yanked downward. What is Gehrman doing?
As Gehrman's struggling against this man, and demons, as he's panting hard, trying to resist. His movement is still restricted from his armor and what he's wearing. And as he's slammed down into his seat, he feels just a rack of pain shoot up his spine and into his skull, and it begins to ring again as he kind of cries out. And just kind of slumps there in the chair again.
Sit down and shut up, Christian. Marquette's withdraws his hand from you, although he continues to look at you with a scowl on his face.
At this point, when all this is going on with Gehrman, Julietta, she's realized that the stiletto is in her skirts, and she grabs for it with her right hand and slips it out quickly, and she's going to attempt to swing at Lady Theophana next to her, right at her throat.
Okay, roll a dexterity melee. That is a hit. Go ahead and roll damage for stiletto. It'll be strength +1.
Is soak damage the same dice?
Yes, soak and damage.
Okay.
And as you drive the stiletto deep into her delicate neck, Lady Theophana turns just in time to see you swing the stiletto and bury that blade into her throat, and you see the knife go in and sink into her flesh, biting down, and you see the faint trickle of blood from her wound, although you do not see the horror on her face of someone who has just been stabbed. Indeed, you see her giggle and smile and reach up with those long fingers and grasp around your wrist as she looks at you. What are you doing? As she pulls insistently on your wrist like a child, yanking the knife out of her throat, and to your horror, Julieta, you see the wound vanish in her neck. What is Julieta doing as she's left clutching this bloody stiletto with nothing to show for her efforts?
Um, well, immediately when it hits and she pulls back, she stumbles backwards. She's trying to stand, but the chair is behind her, so she's bumping into it, and she's in total fear, and her chest is pounding, and a small scream of horror kind of falls from her dry and chapped lips, and when she sees the wound heal, her eyes are just fixated on it, and her mouth is agape in horror, and she nothing comes out, but she just keeps backing up even though she's bumping into the chair.
And as you try to back away, Lady Theophana maintains her grip on your wrists with her slender, girlish hands stained in blood, and she pulls on you insistently, looking up at you with a wicked, manic smile, her eyes wide, sunken in the hollows of her cheeks as she looks up at you, grinning wide with her mouth open. Sit down, Lady Julieta. And at that word sit, it hits you like a hammer in your mind, and you find yourself complying. You find your legs numb and heavy as stone, Julieta, as they walk forward of their own accord, and you find yourself sinking back down into your seat with a heavy thud. Let's just take that away from you. Clearly you can't be trusted with anything, Lady Theophana says as she pries, digging her spidery fingers into the grip that you have around the stiletto and prying it out of your hands. What is Julieta doing?
Um, well, she's forced to sit, so she does comply, and her bottom sits down on the chair once more, and her arms are shaking in the grasp of Lady Theophana as she looks onto the woman, and she takes the stiletto away from her, and her eyes kind of fixate on her as she says, "What are you?"
Valentino, you find yourself standing there watching this exchange in horror as the other hosts are subduing their guests. And at the other end of the table, Diego, you see this. You saw the whole thing. You saw her stab Theophana. You saw the wound close. What are you doing? Oh, that's to Diego. Oh, I think we're having trouble with Scott.
Oh, I thought you said Valentino.
Oh, I did. Yeah, describe Valentino, but then I switched over to Diego. Sorry.
Oops.
I was kind of moving fast. Go ahead and describe what Diego's seeing. Because he's sitting near Julieta and Theophana. Like they're near right next to him, where he's sitting next to Venceslas. He saw the whole thing.
Diego leans forward when he sees the knife flash in the candlelight, and he even puts a macabre smile on when he sees it buried in this weird woman's neck. But that look of satisfaction slowly turns to horror as she acts as though nothing's happened and pulls it out. And just then, as if he hadn't known already, he realizes the amount of danger they're really in. Not danger for their physical body, because he's already given up on that, but danger for their very souls.
And the camera does shift back to Valentino as he stands there. What is Valentino doing?
Valentino watching the father be pulled down by this large man and watching this girl completely ignore a stab to the neck and the wound disappear. He stops to look at this girl, and he looks back at this man who stopped Garam. He's looking around the table at all of the guests and kind of coming to this realization that it's not just Lady Yadvika, but he's surrounded by individuals of occult or some unnatural power.
And as you stare hopelessly around at this muted scene of horror, Lord Claudius has approached you, Valentino, where you stand at the far end of the table, and he holds out the axe to you. Well, go on. And he motions to the lamb.
Valentino, determined to see the end of these games and the end of him being played with like a toy, he takes this weapon in his hand with a look of contempt towards Giovanni and towards Lady Yadvika, and then he walks over to this flailing lamb, and he looks back at the guests, at Garamond, Diego, and Julieta, and then looks back at the lamb, and he raises this weapon and brings it down as quickly and decisively as he can on this lamb's head.
The lamb is jerking in its leash, and the servants are making no effort to hold it still. It will be difficult to hit it. Go ahead and make a dexterity melee roll, difficulty 8. And as you bring the axe down, something horrible happens. The axe bites into the sheep's neck and causes it to scream piteously, but it cuts the cord and opens an artery in the sheep's neck as the lamb breaks free and stumbles, staggering away from you, resulting in a bloody mess with the sheep running around the hall as if trying to get away and spurting blood out of the wound in its throat, the messy gash in its neck drawn by a man who had never had to kill his dinner before. The lamb bleats piteously as it stumbles and staggers, its hooves not finding good purchase on the stone as its spindly legs crumble underneath it, and it falls to the ground, spurting blood, and all the while Claudius and the other hosts are laughing uproariously as you stand there, Valentino, with this bloody axe in your hand, watching what you've done, as the sheep stumbles and tries to rise back to its feet before running a few more feet and then collapsing again, blood spraying the feast hall. You see Lothar laughing with them, looking at you.
Valentino throws the axe on the ground, just very frustrated at the laughter, and this clearly they're just some game to them. And he kind of holds his hands out. He says, "It is over. If we are to die, let us hasten to it. Be done with these games."
Oh, let us not speak of death. Claudius moves from his place at the table, scooping an elegant goblet and approaching the now still kicking lamb where it lay upon the floor. He reaches down with the mouth of the goblet and presses it against the wound where it is still spurting, filling up the cup. And as he turns and approaches you where you stand there, Valentino, for the second time this night, you are asked to taste blood as he holds out the goblet to you. Taste your kill.
Valentino he doesn't say no, he shakes his head just in annoyance and disagreement, and he takes the goblet while shaking his head, and after a brief pause, already having been subjected to the taste of blood, somewhat inured by it, he drinks from the goblet.
Go ahead and make a stamina roll. Difficulty will be only 5, but it is raw animal blood. You do manage to stomach it down, although your throat tightens and your gorge rises in protest against this vile taste. And as you drink from the goblet, Lord Giovanni smiles a devilish leer. The camera pans back to Gehrman and Julieta and Diego as their poor friend, their poor guest, Valentino Devaya, is subjected to this humiliation before their assembled guests for his volunteering. We see briefly that Mariana and Saga are sitting there, but they're sitting in mute horror, just agape, agog with this terrifying scene. Mariana is blank, staring off into the distance as though she's not there. But the camera does pan back to first to Diego. How is he taking in this horrifying scene?
Diego was so ready to sort of shunt this to another part of his mind, almost like a dream, almost like it couldn't be happening to him. Something that only happens in nightmares. But the screaming of this lamb brings him back to reality, and he realizes, real and true, that he's actually sitting here, and he begins to sob right there in his chair, not knowing what else to do.
As Diego dissolves into sobs, tears mixing with the blood on his face, what is Julieta doing? Just a few chairs down.
Well, when Diego begins to sob, Julieta looks from Valentino and over to Diego, and she feels bad for him. I mean, she feels bad for all of them. They're all in a nightmare, and she watches Diego as he sobs in his chair, and if she wasn't who she was, she probably would be crying right now too, but she's just too full of adrenaline and fear that the tears won't come. Instead, she just sits there in horror and shock as she watches this man wither into himself.
Lord Giovanni is looking around the room, and Julieta, as you look at this horrifying scene, as Valentino drinks from the cup, and you see Theophana next to you, she's clapping uproariously. The other hosts are still laughing. Gehrman, what are you doing as the camera pans down to you?
Gehrman has his head in his chest, and it seems he's having a hard time breathing, but then he throws his head back, and he begins to, the sound splits the air as he begins to start laughing with them. As he coughs up blood onto his chest. Why do you tarry, demons? I would have supper, but I would have it with my lord, and I would not keep him waiting.
Lord Giovanni snatches the cup from Valentino's hand as Gehrman says that, and he sweeps over to the table where Gehrman is sitting. But first you must sup with us, churchman. Taste my dinner. He holds out the goblet to you from across the table, bidding you to drink.
Gehrman looks at the cup very slowly and then looks back up at Giovanni. And then very slowly and shakily, he reaches his hand out to clutch the goblet. And once he places it in hand, he brings it to him and kind of has it resting on his chest as he peers at it, and then looks back at Giovanni. I would not dine from the table of a demon. And he just lets the goblet fall as his hand drops to his side.
As the goblet clatters to the table, Lord Giovanni's face twists into a look of fury as he snatches the goblet, almost moving too fast for a human being. Wretched ingrate! He hisses. How dare you! He shouts and abruptly drenches Gehrman in the blood, throwing the goblet of soupy, thick, clotted animal blood in his face, drenching him in it. "If you will not eat my dinner, then you shall become my dinner." The guests have fallen silent as Claudius has exploded in fury at Gman.
Gman, his body unable to move or react, just covered in the blood as he continues struggling to breathe. He just continues to try to breathe. He has nothing left to say.
And as the blood drips thick and heavy, clotted and cooling down your face, Gman, Lord Claudius's look of rage immediately breaks into a smile. "It is time we told you, our guests, our secret. Though I imagine it is not so much a secret now." He places the goblet back down upon the table. "You are our lambs. You are as food to all of us. You are not here to be served. You are here to be served to us." And he laughs as the other hosts begin to chuckle politely. "We have tenderized you before dinner, and now you are ready to be eaten." He gazes into the eyes of the woman who had accompanied him all this evening, his guest, Mariana, and says, "Mariana, ascend to the table." And as if in a trance, Mariana steps up, climbing the table, shedding her gown as she glides, hypnotized, onto the huge empty platter which is in the center of the table, laden, or supposed to have been laden for food, as it falls, and we see her delicate breasts and the soft pink droplets of her nipples as she sheds her gown and lays upon the huge platter. As Lord Giovanni walks towards the table and goes on. "The circumstances of the feeding impart a great flavor to the blood," he says as he divests her of her dress, pulling it off of her ankles. "How tawdry to violently attack our food before the kill. When prey is startled, its blood fills with a bitter acid that, in large amounts, is most distasteful. And yet, to dull the victim into a submissive stupor creates a sluggishness of the blood. The blank-eyed prey whose soul has been crushed makes for a boring meal, one without spice." Lord Giovanni is provided a metal collar by a nearby servant, and he clamps it around Mariana's naked throat as she lays upon the large platter, ready to be served. The collar has a single hole in it, some of you might be able to see. "So, what is the solution to this Epicurean dilemma?" I thought to myself, a mere drop of the acid, a mere tinge of poison. Ergo not shock, but a mild, sustained dread, followed by sweet surrender. Lady Theophana rises from the table and eagerly offers him Giulietta's stiletto as he reaches out and takes it. It excites the blood of the prey as it stimulates the soul of the predator. As terror builds without total panic, a drop of this savory zest is added to the blood, and Lord Giovanni thrusts a jeweled dagger into the hole in Mariana's metal collar. As her crimson blood begins to flow, he inserts a keg-tap provided him by a servant into the hole. The flow stops. He neatly dabs the spilled blood off her neck with his embroidered linen napkin. "Also, you must wait until the appetite comes over you, but before the ravening hunger overwhelms you. Eating when full dulls the mind and senses. The eater must be prepared, and the eaten must be prepared as well." And all the hosts are lingering, leaning forward, hanging on Giovanni's every word. "We are ready. Our food is ready, my friends. Let us eat." Claudius turns the tap, and blood flows smoothly from the woman's neck into his goblet, replacing the animal blood that was there. He swirls the blood and smells it deliriously happy, and then raises the goblet to the guests and drinks a heady draught. When he lowers the cup, his eyes bulge with the rapture of a fanatic as his mouth opens and his jaw opens on its hinge as we see his fangs, and a smile spreads across his blood-soaked lips. The guests cheer, saying, "It's our turn! Enough anticipation!" Lady Jadwiga calls from the head of the table, and they cry out, "Wait! Wait!" shouts Claudius. "Before we gorge ourselves, we must test the loyalty of our newest household soldier." The camera is going to pan back to the rest of you as this terrifying scene unfolds. What is everyone else doing?
Valentino is looking in disgust and horror at what he quietly thought in the back of his mind might happen is now actually happening with all the nuance. But he's doing his best to hold it back from his face.
Diego, Julieta.
Diego's eyes drift naturally to where Giovanni is calling to his new soldier. Everything else that's happened is just further icing on the cake now. He already knows these people are demons.
Julieta, I mean, if it's possible for her to look any more horrified than she did the last 15 minutes, then you would have to look upon her face, because when he places the tap in Mariana's neck, and she recalls that he is referring to them as their dinner, she falls into a complete terror frenzy. And she starts to feel like she is in the coffin again and she needs to escape this place. She doesn't even bother to look at the others. She knows what they're thinking. They're thinking just like she, and she immediately pushes away from the table once more. But this time it's a very abrupt push, and the chair behind her flies backwards, and she kind of panics, and her breath is short as she's going to try and make a break for it.
As you try to rise to your feet, Julieta, you find that your legs are not working. You find that they're heavy as stone and refuse to obey you. The command to sit is still upon you. Something upon your mind is keeping you in your chair, and as you push away from the table, Lady Theophana rises, and your horror is made all the worse that you have nowhere to go, as she walks around behind you, grips the back of your chair, and scoots you almost daintily back into place. Now, Lady Julieta, don't go anywhere. I have yet to taste you, She drags her fingers over your throat and then moves to resume her own seat. What is Gman doing as Lady Julieta begins to hyperventilate with fear?
Gman seems to be motionless. He's still struggling to breathe, and it seems he's lost all strength for defiance. But as Julieta flies back in her chair, and there's clanging and loud cluttering sounds, and as the moment draws nearer, Gman knows that he's faced with his death, and it will be soon. So in place of defiance, there's just fear that has finally gripped him, and he closes his eyes as if praying that it will be swift and over soon, as his body just lays there in the chair.
And as Gman closes his eyes and begin to pray, we see at the far end of the banquet hall 2 guards enter. They're escorting the a limping figure that many of you might recognize. We see Matteo, the young soldier who was wounded from the Red Lamb, the maimed condottiero. He is limping in the company of 2 guards, but he is also wearing the regalia of one of Giovanni's soldiers. Lord Claudius says, "Now, my newest soldier," his lips still stained with blood. "The time has come for you to prove your loyalty to us. Are you a truly hardened crusader, wounded in battle, or a farm boy who fell on his own pitchfork? Come, my faithful Roman legionnaire. Pierce the side of our sacrificial lamb." He holds out Giulietta's stiletto. As Matteo looks at the jeweled dagger, and Claudius points at Giulietta herself, Matteo blanches instinctively, looking around at the scene of horror before him. And as he stands there and everyone watches upon a dime, and the silence falls over the hall as Lord Claudius offers the dagger to him, Matteo looks at the rest of you, and then also, finally, to Gman. Gman, what are you doing as you meet eyes with Matteo from across the hall?
Gman is closing his eyes, praying for swift and easy passing. But as he looks up and glances at the man that has just entered the room, he quickly, with a strength he didn't know he still had, lurches forward and falls onto the table and reaches out, almost as if trying to touch Matteo. "Run, brother! They're demons!"
You are wrestled back into your chair as the other hosts begin to laugh, as Marquettus sits you back down. And at this moment, Matteo summons all his courage. You see him swallow hard and straighten his back as he brings his strength around and says quietly to Lord Claudius, "My lord, I cannot. Such wickedness is against God." And as Claudius Giovanni's face goes slack in a look of apoplectic fury, the rest of the hosts laugh uproariously, even louder, as Claudius's fist tightens around the dagger. He roars, "I do not believe you fought with the great crusader Hunyadi! Crippled coward! Pierce him or die!" He holds out the dagger, waving it at Matteo, who again refuses. And you notice, Gman, Marquettus is looking between you and the new soldier, and then back to you, and then to Matteo as well, putting the pieces together before rising with a look of disgust twisting over his furious countenance as he walks over to the terrified soldier where Matteo stands, and in one blow with the back of his fist spins Matteo around. The soldier's legs buckle, but Marquettus holds him up, not letting him fall yet, not done with him. Looking back at Gman and smiling savagely before turning to beat him again and again, hammering, dropping his fist over and over into Matteo's face until it is a mass of blood. And finally, Marquettus lets him fall, letting him crumple into a heap on the floor, striding back to his seat afterwards. What is Gman doing as Marquettus beats Matteo?
Gman is struggling, trying to fight off Marquettus. With a new found energy he didn't know he had. He's desperate to get over to help him.
And as you rise to your seat, because of course Marquettus is not there anymore, he has walked around the table. And as you rise to your seat to try to get to him, you see Claudius, who has looked at you. He locks his eyes with you and he tells you, "Sit down." And despite yourself, you find yourself forced to sit, forced to watch, Gehrman, unable to rise.
While all this is going on, Julietta, tears begin to stream down her face, but she doesn't sob. It's only tears that start to wash away the blood and the grime from the coffin, as she witnesses all of this going on in front of her.
Valentino, you are closest to this beating. You were given a front row show to it. What are you doing as you stand there?
Valentino, seeing this mammoth of a man just beat down on this invalid, has no desire to incur additional wrath this night. He already knows he's probably going to die. He does not want any excessive punishment, so he is kind of slowly backing away and giving this man space. He has no desire to be this invalid's hero, so he's going to let it happen and step away.
Lady Adviga rises from the table, and you see her doughy hands clasp you around the shoulder as she guides you back to her seat. Do you follow with her?
He does. Valentino follows, not knowing what else to do at the moment.
Your lamb does not bleat or resist, Claudius says to her as she walks by, and she gives a simpering, doughy smile. It is all a matter of breaking the beast, Lord Claudius, she purrs, guiding you back to your seat. And as Marquetus finishes his beating, and Matteo falls to the floor laying there, Lord Giovanni says, "Oh, I nearly forgot to tell you." And he turns back to where you were sitting, Gehrman, looking directly at you for dramatic effect, just as everyone falls silent. Soldier Matteo wishes to thank you for interceding on his behalf to join my troops. The other demons in the room laugh appreciatively at the irony. What is Gehrman doing as he is mocked?
He's gonna take a moment, very serious, very distraught at what's happening, and yet a smirk is gonna cross across his face. And yet you struggle and strain and writhe in front of the face of true faith.
Claudius' face twists into fury, and he approaches you, leering down at you, a shorter man, a doughy man, a wrinkled man in his late 30s, early 40s, someone you would not normally be afraid of, and yet as he approaches you, you see the face of a demon as his lips curl back into a snarl and his fanged countenance. Make a courage roll, Gehrman. Go ahead and describe Gehrman as he faces this oncoming demon.
As he bears into his face, Gehrman, with all his energy, tries to straighten his back and glare right back at him.
What do you know of God, Crusader? What do you know of food? Of eating? Lord Claudius hisses in a low, demonic growl. And then he withdraws. Go on. After all, you did this to him. And as he withdraws, we see the servants move around the room. They are clamping metal collars onto everyone's necks, affixing keg-taps into the hole in each collar, plunging daggers into the holes and making sure that you remain seating. The camera is going to shift to each of you. But before it does, we see Saga. She does not resist. Lady Demetra is stroking her hair. And of course, Mariana still lays there, her own collar already affixed. First, Gehrman, as you gaze defiantly into the face of Lord Claudius Giovanni, you feel the collar clamp around your neck. What are you doing as it does?
His his features are crumpled and distorted with, and his lips are trembling, and his face is almost stuttering with pure fury, a fury and a hatred he has for something that he's never known. And as the collar clamps around his neck, he straightens up and tries to gather his composure. It's difficult because waves of fear are constantly rushing over him.
The camera pans to Julieta as she remains seated there, forced to do so by the command that Theophana had given her. Julieta, you feel the cold iron of the collar as it slips around your throat.
Is there any way Julieta can fight this?
Not really. She can't rise from her seat, and there are as many as three servants working to affix this collar to her. She can certainly struggle, but it's virtually impossible to get away.
Well, she does so then. She's going to struggle, but it is to no avail, and she sits there with the few remaining tears that fall from her eyes, and she cannot garner the strength to look at the others because she knows that the exact same thing is happening to them, and she just looks across the room in a daze as this is happening, and she tries to put herself somewhere else. She doesn't want to think about it anymore. She thinks of her son.
The camera pans down to Diego at the far end of the room where his own collar is being affixed, and Venceslas is smiling, watching you with what you think, Diego, is some sort of horrible mixture of pride and anticipation.
Diego says softly to him, "You promised to be my patron. Now the dream dies with me." And he puts on a look of such placid contemplation that surely this must be the look that a victim of a murderer sees when that murderer cares nothing.
"Oh, but you are! I am your patron," Venceslas says, stroking your face as the collar is put into place, and you feel the sharp bite of the dagger, Diego, as the keg-tap is put in place and the servants daintily wipe the blood away. And you feel that dull, deep ache as that keg-tap grinds into your artery in your neck. And there it sits, a dull, throbbing ache. And this is something that all of you are feeling, the pierce of the dagger and that grinding keg-tap and the dull, deep, bone-deep throbbing ache in your throat. The camera shifts to Valentino as his own collar is being fastened, and Lady Jadwiga watches with what must be excitement and anticipation upon her doughy face.
Valentino, as he feels this iron collar come around, he closes his eyes, and he knows this is his imminent death, and he can't hide his fear anymore, so he feels the tears come down, but he opens them up to look back at Jadwiga. Lady Jadwiga, I would know before I die how my lady came to acquire such great power over the mind.
Presumptuous bumpkin, she chuckles at you. And such secrets are not for the lowborn. And yet you are good enough to be my meal. I think you should be proud of that. It is your life's crowning achievement to sit at this table with me. And as the keg tap is affixed into your throat, Valentino, she reaches out and pats your face. The lash that she pats upon stinging sharply as she does so. What follows is a montage as we pan forward in time. The vampires excitedly moving from each guest to each guest, turning the taps and sampling the different vintages. We see their fangs now extended, making no effort to hide them, drinking amongst each other with what is clearly drunken revelry and some sort of perverse sexual arousal, a cold energy that they all seem to share in the act of feeding, where the five of you sit numbly in your chairs. If any tries to rise, of course they experience what poor Julieta and Gman did, forced to sit back down, where Mariana lays, perhaps the most unfortunate of all, naked upon the mirror polish of this large platter, her throat tapped for Lord Giovanni's appetite. He does not allow anyone to drink from her. He saves her for himself, drinking draught after draught. They reel amongst each other like drunkards, talking too loudly, waving their arms like madmen. And you are all forced to sit there and watch as the real party begins, their real feast. As they tap the neck of Julieta, you hear them say, "It's a naive, domestic vintage, without any breeding. But I think you'll be amused by its presumption," Lady Jadwiga says to Theophana. Excuse me. And they both laugh. During the drinking session, at some point, they raise another toast. "To the eternal destruction and damnation of Japheth Cappadocius," Venceslas says. And Lord Claudius replies, "To the continuing blessed ignorance of Hardestat and his motley mob. My friends, we must be bold, we must take great risks. How else will we win anything worth the winning?" And as this party continues and this feast goes on, we see Claudius moving amongst you. And finally, he deigns to address you at some point. "Thank you ever so much, my dear friends." Claudius clasps a hand on Gman, and all of you are reeling, milk-white and pale, having lost so much blood that the world, the edges of your vision have begun to get darker as a blackness seems to close in and colors become less bright, they become less vivid. You feel yourself slowly dying drop by drop. And yet these monsters won't put you out of your misery. They won't let you die. "You will die, of course," Lord Claudius says, with the manner of someone who is quite drunk. "In a few months we shall send word to your provincial homes that you were set upon by brigands. Or monsters. Or even Turks. Or your loved ones." He pauses to look at a character who is sitting there at the far end of the table. Valentino. "Well, if any will grieve or resolve never to set foot out of their shit-stained palaces." Isn't that right, my friend? And Lord Claudius taps you heavily on the shoulder with his palm, Gman. What is Gman doing as Claudius says this to the rest of them?
Gman is sitting in somber silence as his face is still racked with frustration and fury. Now tears beginning to fall across his face through the combination of his frustration and pain, and maybe a little bit of fear of dying. But he's past the moment of defiance, and he's ready to die.
All of you feel weak, dizzy, and the world begins to turn blurry as the extremities of your limbs begin to turn cold from blood loss. And just as you're about to succumb to utter despair, the party is interrupted as we hear A loud crash. This crash shakes the whole manor as the walls shudder under some great assault, and all the hosts freeze in mid-revel, panic on their blood-stained faces. Suddenly, an alarm goes up. You hear guards shouting, footsteps clattering, and warning bells jangling all throughout the manor. Another crash from the southern wall shakes the entire building. Some of you threaten to fall out of your seats as the next crash comes. A sentry comes in, running in. My lord! My lord, we are under attack! A century of men-at-arms! Hardestat's troops! We're overwhelmed! And immediately the hosts leap up from their meals. Claudius rages, the founders damn their eyes! Lady Theophana, look, she wails in fear. We're trapped! Immediately, Lady Jadwiga scowls. Someone has betrayed us! And at that, you see Lady Demetra finally speak. It must have been that Malkavian madwoman Theophana. We should have teared out her deceitful heart. Impossible, shouts Sire Venceslas. You're just saying that to throw us off the track, gangrel. It must have been you. I've never trusted you. Immediately, we see Marquetas. More likely that the Lady Jadwiga is behind it. Scheming venture who always put clan before allies. Lady Jadwiga snorts. You are an adult-pated old bohemian. I hate Hardestat and have often attacked his holdings. I say we stay and prove that we are doing nothing to merit an attack. Stay, Theophana says, and entrust my fate to that madman? Never! Lady Demetra immediately shouts, Giovanni betrayed us! We were fools to believe that he would attack his fellow Cappadocians. Immediately Claudius bellows among all the bickering, Silence! I forbid this infighting! Follow me now, or we are all dead! You hear the shouting rise and the sounds of violence carrying down the hall of the manor house as it shakes again. There's nowhere to go! Let's fight them, Marquetas shouts. This is not the place, Claudius says. We can go to the reliquary. They cannot follow us there. Yes, Lady Theophana says. We can go. Come, Claudius insists. I have a way out through the crypts below. Come quickly. But they will follow us, Lord Sire Venceslas says. Your soldiers will fall like the pathetic mortals they are. Giovanni thinks, aye, they will. We must slow Hardestat. Embrace your prey. They are drained and will quickly change. That will slow our pursuers and buy us time to escape before our children are destroyed in the onslaught. What if one survives? Sire Venceslas says. Ha! Giovanni snorts. I remind the gentle Venceslas that our attackers are the fanatical founders. Hardestat would never suffer one to live. Now do it! It's the only way. We see a horrifying montage before our eyes as each vampire quickly drains the remaining blood from each of you, fangs slicing into your wrists and throats as they dip down to feed upon you, and all of you are gripped in the rapturous ecstasy of the kiss. The only one who is not is the Lady Mariana, who shrieks bloody murder as Lord Claudius feeds upon her, thrashing and causing the fine cutlery to fall to the floor, just flailing upon her platter where she had laid so docile as a lamb. All of you fade out, drifting into death, your last moments as your hearts slow in their beating. And as each vampire begins to bite their wrists and force their wrists in your mouth, the last thing you taste before you slip into unconsciousness is cold seep of blood. Immediately, the camera begins to slowly fade out as we drift, and death overcomes all of you, your horrifying last scenes being the chaos of the dining hall. So with that, guys, we're going to take our break early because, well, we've got our 10-minute break coming up, and I don't want to like interrupt the next part of this scene halfway through. So we're gonna take a quick breather, and I'm sure we'd all agree after that we kind of need one.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, it's we're kind of like I said, we're in the prelude section, and it's a lot more description from me, and trust me when I say I won't be talking this much throughout the course of the game. In fact, when you guys get your own agency and the story's kind of progressing, you get up on your feet, like I'll just be in the background, kind of doing what I do. Like I said, the pace will change.
No, yeah, I get it. That makes sense. A prelude has to be pretty structured.
Damn, dude. So our embrace isn't even because they wanted to.
Ah. Nope, we just didn't.
Yeah, that took me by surprise.
So during the break, I'm gonna whisper you guys your generation.
All right, I'm gonna get some water. I'll be right back.
Okay.
That's gonna stay a secret, of course.
Yeah, I'm just gonna give it to you guys individually over Skype.
Damn.
Here we go, Gen 14. Shut up.
Wow. That was crazy.
Poor Gammon.
Dude, right?
I felt bad for him. He was just. Ugh.
He's trying so hard.
I mean, if he's defeated, we're all defeated. It's kind of like, you know. At least I got a dagger in my sire's throat for about 2 seconds.
I mean, there you go. It wouldn't even give me a weapon. Fucking smart, too. I'd have fucking decapitated that guy. I was like, oh my god, Gavin wants to kill somebody so bad.
Yeah, Leda Theophana made me look stupid, though. She's looking at me like, what are you doing?
Silly goose.
You're so silly. Like,
You're like, bitch, I just stabbed you.
I know.
Come on.
Ugh.
Dang. Yeah, I'm gonna go get a drink or something. My throat's killing me.
All right, so everybody has been informed of their generation and sires, as I'd like to see it on their sheets. So I'll be right back. I'm gonna grab a drink.
All right, I'm back.
Welcome back.
All right, I return.
I'm back.
Thank you. So like I said, everybody has their generation and their sire, as I'd like to see it on your sheets. So go ahead and update your character sheets. And actually, is everybody back?
Yeah.
Okay. Scott, Sam, you here?
Yep.
How about Scott? No, Scott's gone. So we'll wait. First part of that.
Freaking crazy.
Right?
Which part in particular?
I don't know, just anything really. I'm just curious what you guys think.
I enjoyed it. It was very, like you said, like scripted, but I enjoyed the liberties we did have for it.
I'm back.
Welcome back, Scott. So yeah, like I said, just go ahead and update your generation and your sire on your sheet. Also, I think this is a good time to have a word on blood points, because you guys have been embraced. Blood strength, blood dexterity, blood stamina, blood heal, these are all separate macros. So whenever you want to spend blood points, and you guys can look up a blood chart to see how many you have per turn. You use these macros to do so. So you don't have to say out loud what you're doing and how many blood points you're spending. It won't break the flow of combat or the scene, and it can also feed the information to me because it's a secret macro, and I can keep everything updated, while the scene is going on. So, even though physical rolls are public, and you may see some people's dice pools grow and shrink with the spending of blood and the passing of blood, you'll never be able to like reverse engineer how many blood points they're actually having per turn, because you don't know how much they started with to begin with, and because you can't see their character sheet. So it's just about impossible to find out someone else's generation, which is kind of the way I like it. And that's even if you guys were trying to metagame, which of course I know you guys aren't.
I'm kind of upset that I'm not Generation 14 though.
You wanted to play a caitiff?
No.
Should've took that flaw, man.
That's one down. Only 13 possible generations left. I'll figure this out.
He's already said he would never make us 14 anyway.
Little by little.
Anyway.
Narrowing it down.
Vampires in this time, they don't even believe a 14th generation exists. They think the 13th is the last. All right. So we got a couple more minutes on our break. We can hang out for a second.
Yeah, my throat's kind of hurting.
Yeah, because Gman, he's got like that man voice.
Yeah, fuck.
You gotta put on.
He's, because he's, yeah, he's a lot older than I am, and so I'm trying to put on like a, the raspy, cool voice. You know what I mean?
Just like, just use the voice you would use if you were playing Batman, basically.
Where are the hostages?
Where is she?
Be afraid of me.
There aren't gonna be any fireworks.
I'm not wearing hockey pads. It's like my favorite line out of those movies.
I guess Valentino's not going to get the loving relationship with his sire, like mother-son. I thought that's where it was going.
Yeah, I thought that too. I totally thought that.
It seemed obvious, but threw me
Yeah.
for a loop.
Just a little light whipping, that's pretty common.
That's more like a mommy dearest type of.
No more wire hangers.
I'm better than you, I'm faster than you, and I will always win.
Oh man, that was good.
Yeah, like her portrayal of Joan Crawford in that movie is like, if anybody was going to play Clan Malkavian, that's one of the movies I would give them as homework.
Oh man.
Babe, we gotta watch that movie now. Shit,
I know, right?
I haven't seen that movie in forever.
Dude, me neither.
I read the book too, it was really good.
Oh, really? I never read the book.
She was batshit nuts.
Yeah, I know. Gosh.
Well, we do have to take into consideration that her daughter wrote the book, so it is kind of a biased opinion. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of the stuff she said was true, but maybe a little bit of it is a little dramatized.
Yeah, I guess so.
Maybe.
I mean, she was completely honest about her role in it and everything, though.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that everything she said in the book was true. But it is kind of a biased opinion because she wrote the book came out after, she died. So she couldn't even really say anything against it.
Okay, guys. So, excuse me. Our break is over. So, I'm gonna remind you guys that you now have the full force of your disciplines and all your freebies, all your dots you can benefit from on your sheet because you've been embraced. So I guess, like, gosh, now in our third session, this is where the game finally starts in a lot of ways. It's like finally, right? All right. So unless anybody has any last minute things to do, any last minute questions, we can jump back into it.
Yep.
Real quick, blood pool. Are we starting at max?
You know what? That's a great question. Everybody, go ahead and roll a d4. Just roll 1d4. See how many blood points you have in your body.
Ooh.
All right, let me update my notes. Also on that note, when you guys are feeding, always tell me over Skype how many points you're going to be taking. Yeah, don't say it out loud. Like you just want to take 1 point or 2 points. just make sure to send it to me over Skype or if you know how to whisper here in Roll20, whispering in Roll20 is fine. And then that doesn't break the scene, and we can just keep going.
What does this number mean that I just rolled?
How much blood you're going to start the scene with? How much blood you have in your body?
Is that like literally that's the number, or is this supposed to be a figurative number?
What do you mean?
Like that's the number. That's it.
Yep.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
That's your blood pool.
Okay.
Yeah, we're all
Thank you.
starving pretty much. It's not good.
Yeah, because you guys were embraced in a hurry, and you weren't exactly given a chance to feed at all.
Yay, the world's first shovelheads.
Garriman's in the biggest trouble.
Whatever, man. You all in the room with me.
I know, the biggest guy in the room. I'm like,
And the
great.
bourgeois. Oh my god.
Somebody gonna get Diablo-ized tonight.
I know. One of us is like screwed.
Who's sitting next
Hey.
to me?
Saga.
Yep, Saga's sitting.
Saga.
I know, right?
That's how we ride around and fucking drink her down.
See, I've got a plan. Everything I do.
You.
I know. All right, guys. So let's get back into this. We're gonna open up our next scene. All is darkness. The four of you see nothing but blackness. And as the slow rhythm of your heartbeat begins to get fainter and fainter and fainter, your eyes suddenly snap open, and the world explodes, rushing back at you in a rush of bright color and vivid sounds and images and shapes. As you witness this bloody, disheveled banquet hall, festooned in blood and upturned goblets and trays of food that are splattered across the floor, and the dead lamb which lays across the far end. And you see the bodies of the guests writhing, jerking in their limbs as they come back to consciousness. Your hosts are nowhere to be seen. As the sounds of fighting continue in the halls, and you see the footmen of Lord Giovanni clustered around the hallway doors, preparing to fight, as the hosts begin to thrash and come back into consciousness, screaming and howling as your fangs burst from your gums and you thrash upon the table, or upon your seats, or upon the floor. All six of you have been embraced. And immediately, you find yourself gripped by that terrifying beast which has been born inside you, screaming into life. And a cold thirst which screams to be filled and deep inside you. The camera is going to pan first to Gman as he comes to consciousness. Gman, make a self-control roll, difficulty 9. Oh my god. Roll that 10 again. You completely lose it. You needed more successes than that. As Gman completely falls into the grip of frenzy. And Gman, you see through your own eyes, and yet you're not able to control your body. As you see yourself falling upon something nearby, someone, you're not sure. But your fangs have exploded from your gums, and you grip with your cold, iron hands, dragging something screaming underneath you, sinking your fangs into cold flesh and drinking deep. As Gman is atop his prey, we move now to Diego, who is coming back to consciousness. Diego, make a self-control roll. Your current blood pool. Difficulty is going to be 8. Roll that 10 again. You do manage miraculously to keep control of yourself, Diego. And as the others are thrashing and howling, crying out for blood, Mariana laying atop the table, the others convulsing in their chairs, others thrashing on the floor, and you come back to consciousness, Diego. You find fangs in your mouth as you sit up, your eyes wide, and you see the crashing in the hall, and you see Giovanni's men. What is Diego doing as he comes back to life? His cold body still burning.
Am I able to stand?
Yes, you're able to stand.
Well, he staggers to his feet then, and looks around the room. Everything seems very different now. He doesn't feel his heart beating, or if it is, it's so slow that it might as well not be. He looks around at the convulsing bodies, and he looks over to Gman, who has clearly fallen into some kind of rage.
Gman is atop Saga. She's beneath him, shrieking. And as she howls furiously, her eyes wide, her fangs extended, we see Gman in his mouth hunched over her throat as her flesh withers, as he drinks and feeds upon her.
Did they leave the axe? That's my question.
Yes, the axe is still upon the floor. In fact, you can see it.
He will stride over to pick it up, not to use against these people, but against whoever's coming.
As Diego, as you stand there with the axe, you feel a horrible, hideous, agonizing grinding in your guts.
Ugh.
And you smell the rancid stench of your own night soil as it soils your clothes, as your body continues to die, freshly risen from your grave. The camera shifts to Valentino, who is convulsing in his chair, finally overturned and collapsing to the floor as his fangs open and his eyes burst wide in his handsome, bloody face. Valentino, make a self-control roll. Your difficulty will be 8 as well. The beast comes screaming to the surface of your mind, Valentino, and you completely lose control as we see Valentino's pupil shrink and tighten as the beast takes complete control of him, and he howls like an animal, rising from the floor, his fingers extended, curled. Diego, you see him rise, and he is looking directly at you.
Diego freezes where he is, looking around like an animal caught in torchlight.
Valentino sprints across the dining hall, running directly at you. And as he leaps atop you, Diego, make a resisted strength brawl roll. And I will be rolling for you, Vukar. You are in frenzy.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
For a total of 4 successes, he effortlessly overpowers you, Diego. and as you both crash to the floor, twisting and writhing, these two noblemen thrashing against each other. What is Diego doing as Valentino howls atop him, his fangs extended?
Diego, not even knowing the limits of this new form, instinctually tries to escape.
All right, make your strength brawl roll.
Still difficulty 6?
Yes. All contested rolls are 6, for future reference to everybody.
Get off of me!
To your amazement, you manage to overpower him. What happens, Diego?
Alright. I would like to know if it'd be possible to, instinctually spend blood for celerity.
Yes, absolutely.
And I actually see this as a foolish moment where he doesn't realize he can move that fast and slams himself into the wall.
All right. Go ahead and describe Diego's quick, supernatural speed as he rises from the ground.
Diego pushes Valentino off of him readily and stands up with a speed that almost defies the eyes. And he begins running towards the door, but not realizing just how fast his preternatural limbs can take him. He runs headfirst into the stones and falls back on his ass.
And we see a blur as Diego crashes against the wall, and Valentino is left without any prey, howling and crouched upon the ground. As you spend more blood, Diego, from the effort your body craves to feed, and that hunger threatens to overwhelm you again. Roll self-control, difficulty 9. Go ahead and roll your self-control, Diego. Difficulty 9.
Difficulty 9, okay. Oh shit.
As Diego completely succumbs to the beast that overcomes him, we see him at the far end of the wall where he crashed into, as his fangs extend and his pupils shrink and his mouth opens and he begins howling along with the rest of the chorus. As we see Mariana naked upon the platter on the table, thrashing and howling and rising up, looking around. We see the shit flowing out of her as her guts grind and she continues to die, splattering the once mirror shine of the platter she was laying upon. Valentino, you and Mariana throw yourselves at each other, grappling with this naked young girl as you thrash and claw and bite and pull at each other's hair, lost in the throes of your beast. Gman, as you continue to feed on whatever is in your grasp beneath you, whatever is in your grasp is screaming. Roll a self-control, difficulty 7. And as you do this, Julieta is the last to come to as her eyes snap open and she witnesses this horrifying scene of violence. Then a smell of shit and blood is sharp in the air as Julieta's eyes snap open. Julieta, you make a self-control roll. Your difficulty will be 7. Gman, you continue to grip and claw and feed and growl at this thing beneath you, this prey. You continue to suck and draw upon it. Julieta, you come to, thrashing and howling and screaming in the grip of the beast. Nearby, the only things you can see is Gman, his back turned to you, unaware, feeding upon something. We're going to do a contested strength roll as Julieta throws herself at Gman. And scrap. This will be very interesting. Julieta manages to pull it off.
Just strength?
I'll be rolling for you. You're in frenzy.
Oh, okay.
And Gman effortlessly throws Julieta off of him as she continues to scream and claw and scrabble. She jumps back on top of him, unable to pull him away from his own prey. And yet her own fangs lurch hungrily for him. And this, as we see these two, as we see these newborn fledgling vampires howling and biting and snapping at each other, we see the doors explode inward, and new arrivals emerge into the banquet hall as the sounds of a melee approach. And as soon as the door splinters, we see a group of armored troops pouring in. Their leader is a giant of a man with gleaming fangs. The troops all wear the standard of a single red rose, and many of them also have bared fangs. The second in command, standing next to the one with the large fangs, is a familiar sight, although he has no fangs of his own. You see Rodrigo, the head coachman from earlier. The tall leader bellows to his troops at the scene unfolding before them as they continue to fight and clash with Giovanni's men. "Destroy them, my hearties, but leave at least one alive for torture." Rodrigo at his side shouts, "Surrender, you traitorous dogs! My Lord Hardestat will spare you if you surrender now." As we see the man at the head of the band that has entered the room. What follows is we see a montage of horrible, hideous violence. We see Hardestat's troops clashing with Giovanni's men. We see guts being spilled, limbs being chopped. A foot lays there, a hand here, severed arms and spurting blood, cries of pain. We see Hardestat setting to Giovanni's men with almost effortless ease, cleaving through them with a broadsword. And as we do so, Gman, make a self-control roll, difficulty 7. Diego, make a self-control roll, difficulty 9. Valentino, you will also get one at difficulty 8. Julieta, roll self-control at difficulty 7. The camera focuses Valentino. Valentino, you've managed to come back to yourself, crouched in the center of the room as you were, and you see the melee unfolding before you. You see the troops of the Red Rose clashing with Giovanni's skull-bannered men, and you see the violence all around you. What are you doing as you come back to yourself, Valentino?
Valentino, extremely disoriented and trying to wrap his head around how he's no longer hearing the white noise of his body while seeing this melee unfold, and the guests that he was previously meeting are all apparently trying to eat each other. He is so overwhelmed, but over all everything else, he is still starving, and he's looking for... He instinctively knows he needs to feed like the others he's seeing, and he sees, or he looks for the music players that he noticed before. Does he see them?
No, the music players are actually gone. Everyone has fled, including Giovanni's servants and the hosts as well. The only thing that remains are Giovanni's men who are fighting with Hardestat's men. Okay.
Valentino is going to look for the exit. If he maybe heard a suggestion of an exit in the blur and the chaos earlier, he might look and see if he can find that exit that they took or left through.
All right, go ahead, and as you look around, make a perception awareness roll, difficulty 7, as you look around frantically for the exit where they might have run. It's hopeless. There's too much chaos, and as you look around, you manage to spot a soldier dying against the far floor. He's laying upon the stone, scrabbling and howling in pain. He's clutching a wound in his side, flowing freely. His gut, and since you botched your roll, the sight of that blood captivates your hunger once more. Make a self-control roll. Difficulty 8. Valentino, the beast comes back to the fore as you completely lose control, and your fangs extended, howling like an animal. You charge at this man. He looks up with wide eyes, and he sees you at the last minute, screaming for help. But you leap atop him, and you claw hungrily at the wound in his side, and he screams as you pull him open. You feel the flesh under your fingers as you pull the wound wider, and his skin rips up the side of his ribs, and you throw your face down into the wound and continue to guzzle and feed. The camera shifts as we look now to Gman, who has come back to himself. Gman, you are looking down at the shrunken corpse of what used to be Saga Sederstirna. Her blood is still fresh upon your lips. She is completely unconscious and withered, a husk of what she used to be. What does Gman do as he comes back to himself?
Gman is going to stand, this time much easier than it was before, and he's going to kind of take a few steps back as he stumbles, and he's just looking around the room in shock and awe at what's happening, and being overcome with everything. He's going to fall back down as his armor just clatters to the floor, and he's just trying to shake himself and get a hold of himself and the situation that they're in.
And as Diego, you completely lose your control, and as you were across the room, you throw yourself, heedless of the danger, into the melee and begin swinging your hands as though they were claws at the enemy troops and throwing yourself upon them. You even manage to pin one and begin to feed as the others beat you, sticking their swords into you, and yet you feel nothing but his sweet blood flowing down your throat. And as Diego continues to clash with Hardestat's troops, we see Julieta come back to herself. Julieta, you let go of Gman as he has also seemed to regain control of himself, and you're horrified as the beast withdraws and gives you temporary control of your body once more, and you look around. What is Julieta doing? What are we seeing as we look at her?
Well, she's upon the floor at this point, and when she does regain herself, she slowly staggers backwards on her hands and her feet until she feels her back press against the stone walls, and her eyes take in everything that's going on, and there's just a pulsing in her brain, and her senses are just overwhelmed, and she's just manically looking around, much like a beast in a cage.
And as you look around, Julieta, you see the handsome man, Rodrigo, the head coachman you recognized from before, and yet he is clad in armor with his own sword, fighting on the side of the invaders. He says, "Try to keep as many alive as possible," as the other soldiers continue to fight the Giovanni troops. You can see that they are crumbling and losing badly. And across the din of the combat, Rodrigo meets your gaze from across the room, Julieta.
Julietta looks on to this soldier, and she knows he's familiar, but she can't place how she knows him. She can't even place where she is at this point. She's so disoriented with her senses and everything else, and she just watches as this melee takes place, and she watches the soldier fighting these men, and she just she's frozen sitting there on the floor.
And as you are frozen, a blur hits you from your side. Roll your strength brawl, Julietta. Difficulty 6. You are both equally matched, whatever this blur is, and you realize it is the naked form of the peasant girl Mariana, her lovely young body marred by the streak of shit that has run down by her legs, and her eyes wide with fury and her fangs extended as she begins to grapple with you and howl and snap and bite for your throat. Gman, you turn around just in time to see Julietta set upon by Mariana, the two women thrashing on the floor.
Gman's gonna quickly run over, and he's gonna grab Mariana by the shoulders, and he's just gonna chuck her off.
Strength brawl. Unholy demon though she may be, this naked 16-year-old girl thrashes and kicks and howls and snaps, and yet, Gman, effortlessly, you get hold of her. What do you do with her now that you have Mariana in your grip?
He's gonna grab her by the shoulders, and then he's just gonna just pull her off of Julietta, and then just throw her like across the table.
She goes flying, and the clatter of the cutlery and the plates as she slides across the table and lands on the other side. We see Valentino across the way. The soldier underneath him is long dead, as Valentino is pulling his blood-rich organs out of the cavity of his body and hungrily sucking upon them. Valentino, make a self-control roll, difficulty 6, to come back to yourself. And as the beast recedes and your hunger satisfies you, Valentino, you come back to your senses and you see there is an unidentified piece of blood-rich meat in your hands. You can't tell if it's a heart or a liver, but your mouth is stained with it, with the blood that you had been sucking greedily out of it. And you find yourself standing over the dead body of this soldier as the melee clashes all around you and the sounds of battle fill your ears.
Valentino, kind of realizing that he's not sure what, but something feels very instinctively correct about feeding on this man, so he's disregarding for the moment this very odd scene he finds himself in, and realizing he's still in imminent danger, he searches the man for a knife or something else he could conceal.
Julietta, as you are rescued, as Gman has pulled Mariana clean off of you, what do you do as the camera focuses in on you?
After Mariana is thrown from her, she immediately tries to get her sea legs in order and pulls herself upward, but still she leans against the wall like a caged animal, looking about and looking over at Gman, and she does not thank him, for she doesn't really have the mindset to thank him, but she just merely looks about, and her eyes pretty much focus on the melee and the carnage that is taking place in this room, and confusion is just setting on her brow as she says nothing, but her mind is reeling.
And Valentino, as you come back to yourself and look around, you do see something that you were looking for across the far end of the room. It's nearby the tables where Gman and where you see Gman and Julieta are standing on the other side of the table.
Valentino crawls across the floor, kind of trying to duck melee and exchanges, and trying to get to this possible weapon.
You do manage to reach it, your hand clasping around the knife, just in time to hear the call out, "Surrender!" And you see what must be Hardestat, that imposing, terrifying vampire standing at the head of the men. Giovanni's troops have clearly been either killed or fled as this feast hall has become a charnel house. Wearing the red rose, they gather around, and you can see that they are all looking at you. Valentino and Gman and Julieta. The men are wrestling Mariana away as she howls and snaps at them. They put a chain around her neck, and we see Diego hauled out of their midst. Diego has been beaten, but he continues to thrash and snap. They too have affixed a chain around his throat and have him restrained as several men are holding him. Gman, Julieta, Valentino, what are you doing as Hardestat, this fearsome, terrifying-looking vampire, demands your surrender?
As Valentino hears this, he tries to both get up quietly and calmly while trying to conceal his knife somewhere in a pocket.
Go ahead and make a dexterity, dexterity legerdemain roll. Difficulty is going to be 6. No, 7. Your fingers are drenched in blood and it's hard to hold on to it. As you try to hide the dagger, it slips out of your fingers and clatters to the floor. And as the men are either dead or dying, we take in this scene before us. Hardestat standing there at the head of his men, a tall, strapping man with dark hair who appears to be somewhat in his 40s. Lord Hardestat is defined by his imperious bearing and the undeniable dignity of one whose station is far above those around him. He is a vampire that has clearly long abandoned any pretense of humanity. His intense eyes and cold white skin are clear indications that he is nothing less than a monster, which Hardestat makes no visible effort to conceal, even when among his mortal retainers that crowd around him. And you see Rodrigo, by stark contrast, the handsome, youthful man. He turns to Hardestat, "My lord, we must spare them. They might have information on the conspirators." Hardestat is looking coldly at the rest of you. What is Julieta and Gman doing?
Gman is he's slumped himself into a chair, looking over his hands covered in blood, shocked at what the situation he's found himself in, and also the intense strength that he's just displayed. He's always been quite strong, but never that strong. And he's just kind of sat himself in bewilderment, and he's kind of snapped to as Hardestat yells out, "Surrender."
Julieta.
Julieta is merely staring at Hardestat and his colleague. She everything is slowly coming back to her now of what happened, and she, for some reason, isn't as fearful as she was before, but she knows that they are in danger, and she stands where she is. She makes no move to run.
Immediately, Hardestat's men move forward as he seems to nod almost imperceptibly to Rodrigo. Diego and Mariana are in chains, and before long, Valentino, Gman, and Julieta are, as well as Hardestat's men set upon you and tie or clasp a collar around your throat for the second time this night, affixes chains to you, puts you in shackles, and subdues you as Hardestat looks at you. We shall talk further when we reach my castle. Before he turns and motions to his men, barking commands at them to search the manor. Out of the mouth of one hallway that leads out of the banquet hall, you see smoke pouring out as though a fire was set in some other part of the manor. The men wearing the red rose rush out of the room. It appears as though Giovanni's men are either dead or surrendered, completely routed, as the rest of you are dragged out of the banquet hall in chains. Anyone remaining behind, including Saga and some of the other servants, are put to the sword. All of Giovanni's servants are decapitated brutally. You see Saga's withered corpse decapitated and set to flame as you are dragged away in chains. You do see Mateo hauled up off the floor and also put in chains to be taken away with the rest of you, and in shock that he is barely alive. You can see he's breathing, blood dripping from his nose and mouth, pouring out. And yet the smell of that blood is intoxicating to you. And with that, the scene fades as we end, and we open into our next scene. All right. We open our next scene in a much more grim journey than the one that was made before. Once again, our characters, our stars of the show, as we see Valentino and Gman, Julieta, and as well as Mariana and Diego, are being transported in wagons, much as they were before coming to Giovanni's Manor, except it is a much more horrifying journey for them now, a much more grim one. The sunlight is shining outside, and yet the shutters to the carriage are now closed tightly with iron bars and wooden slats which keep the sunlight out. Despite this cover, you are all chained up within these carriages and smoking at the skin under the baleful, hateful gaze of the sunlight, which is just outside the carriage. Two of Hardestat's men are in the carriages with you. Diego and Gman are sharing a carriage, sitting across from two of Hardestat's men. Is Julieta and Mariana and Valentino are crammed into the second. Mariana is still naked, and she was in the throes of the beast so badly that Giovanni's men had stuck her with their iron pokers until she bled out into unconsciousness. She lays cold between you, between Valentino and Julieta. And to get your compliance, or perhaps just for their fun, Hardestat's men had stuck several of you, well, both of you, several times in the belly, in the chest, with their iron pokers to bleed off a little bit more of that blood. And the camera is going to focus on Julieta and Valentino as thin wisps of smoke curl from your skin in the dim, dark recesses of this carriage. What is Valentino doing as we look at him?
Valentino is still trying to get a grasp of all that's happening. He's now realized that the invaders are enemies of what were previously going to be his murderers, or were his murderers. So he's already trying to think of a way that he can maybe connive an alliance with these group out of mutual interest. He's trying to find some way that he can build a bridge before he finds new murderers. So he's sitting quietly in contemplation.
Several holes are still in your chest and belly, Valentino, as they had stuck you with their iron pokers. Just as they had stuck Giulietta, who is sitting on the other side of the unconscious remains of Mariana, whatever is left of that peasant girl and the monster that she is now. Giulietta, you were also stuck in your belly and breasts by these men, and you remain in shackles, sitting across from them, watching them hold their pokers and look at you as if looking for an excuse to use them again. And as we look at Giulietta, what is she doing?
Giulietta has a grimace upon her face as she stares at these guards who are watching over them, and her eyes linger on them before she allows her vision to wander back beside her at Mariana and Valentino, and she is very much as Valentino is. She's very contemplative at this point. She does in some way realize that these people are the enemies of the hosts that they had only encountered several hours before, and she's very quiet. She feels no need to speak at this point, and she's just very, very confused at what's going on and who she is now. Her mind is just buzzing.
And I'll turn the scene over to you, Giulietta and Valentino, briefly, to, if you wish to do anything in the carriage, as you find yourself with each other's company and also the company of these taciturn and vicious guards.
I have a question.
Sure.
What's his name again? Hardestadt, when him and his men came in, were they speaking Italian?
Yes, they were, actually.
Okay.
Valentino. So I assume that Mariana is literally sitting in between them on the bench. So we have to talk faster.
She's slumped between us. Her head's probably on your shoulder.
Okay. Valentino would kind of ease this naked, disgusting corpse off of him so that he could speak to Giulietta and ask her, What do you suppose is going to happen to us now?
And as Mariana slumps forward, clanking in her chains, we see the naked girl just hunched over and her breasts hanging down, and one of the guards reaches up a boot to kick her squarely between the breasts and her chest and slam the unconscious body back against the bucket seat of the caravan.
Before Giulietta can answer, when the guard kicks Mariana backwards, Giulietta swiftly looks over at him and gives him this snarling glare. And it's a very nasty look. She's not particularly a fan of Mariana right now, but she still has the mindset of a lady, and she's quite disgusted with these guards and how they have been treated thus far.
The guard meets your gaze with a glassy-eyed glare.
After a moment, she rips her vision from him, though, and looks over to Valentino, and she sits there a moment thinking about what he's asked her, and she finally says, I do not know what they wish to do with us, but hopefully we won't be dinner again.
Valentino nods solemnly and stares at the two guards.
They stare back at you but don't say anything. The carriage is a very rough ride. It's actually bumpy and hot, and the inside of that carriage might make you vomit if you still had such mortal urges. It's the hot smell of Mariana's shit and blood and the gore that is still upon you, Valentino, from opening that man. And that thought is still with you, the way you had torn him open at his side and drunk what was in. His blood still is on your tongue.
Valentino's kind of thinking about that man that he apparently consumed, and he thought about the scenes before when everything was more alive, and he felt more alive when he was forced to drink blood, and the difference and this kind of evolution physically that is starting to follow mentally from when he was whipping that servant. And he's trying to reconcile what that means for him. And so he returns to a quiet, thoughtful look as he kind of looks down and away.
And we're going to shift scene as we move to the other carriage where Diego and Gehrman are chained up with two guards also. Diego, Gehrman, you have also been stuck several times with these bleeding rods that these men are holding, these iron pokers. They had stuck you in the belly and the chest to first, just before he shut you in that hot confine of the wagon, which is currently riding bumpily and roughshod over the road. I'm going to turn the scene over to Gehrman and Diego.
Am I awake now?
Yes, you have finally come back to yourself for the moment. You did feed during the battle, so I'll let you know what your blood's currently at.
Diego moans deeply, turning his head painfully to look at the guards and to look at Gehrman. He doesn't say anything, his face is placid. His tongue keeps flicking over those sharp little teeth in his mouth.
Gehrman is also somber and silent as he stirs with thought. After a moment of quiet, he'll look up to one of the guards with him. What happened to that girl?
The men stare stonily at you.
The one I attacked.
The corpse, one of them intones.
So she did not survive.
They simply stare at you.
I saw you, you know, Diego says. You were drinking her blood.
Gehrman's gonna wince, kind of down into his shoulder at the thought of it. No, that can't be right. I would never attack a girl like that.
The dim dark. I'm sorry, go ahead.
They've done something monstrous to us.
The dim darkness of the coach is obscured even further by the small wisps of smoke which are curling off of your skin and filling the carriage. The vapor doesn't have a smell to it, but there is something instinctive inside you, something low and evil and feral deep in your breast which fears what is outside this carriage. And you know instinctively, without having to know, without having to be told, that the hated, dreaded sunlight is why you are currently smoking at the skin. And More than anything, there is a part of you that fears they will open that window.
Why didn't they just kill us?
Perhaps they are not finished. Are we truly this forsaken? As he kind of looks down into his hands, but he's clearly finds himself leaning away from the windows, unaware that he's doing so.
So the two of you fall silent.
Yes, Diego forces himself to sigh and bows his head.
Yes, Gman will fall silent in conversation, but he'll be muttering prayers in Latin.
The journey is, as I said earlier, very bumpy and hot. Far from comfortable. In fact, you are perhaps the most miserable you have ever been, and though some of you may have fed during the attack while you were in the grip of the beast, it wasn't enough. And for all four of you, the hunger is sharp and constant. The journey takes the rest of that day, though you are only to tell that the sun has gone down once you stop smoking at the skin. A curious thing, a supernatural thing, somewhat fascinating, if it wasn't so horrifying at what you had become. Your bodies feel as though they were carved out of wood. There's something heavy and sharp around the edge of your senses, and your limbs feel very unfamiliar, as though your body is a foreign thing that you have to reestablish a relationship with. It doesn't work the way it used to. And as the four of you sit there, some of you might notice that you have no longer need to breathe, that your heart no longer needs to beat, and that you are cold. And the only thing that matters is the hunger, which is your constant companion, a hunger and the smell of that blood, which very nearly drives you to madness. After the sun dips below the horizon, cresting down, it breaks behind the silhouette of the Carpathian Mountains in the distance, and we see the wagons continue on in darkness. In the distance, you see, well, as the camera pans away and we see the wagons moving down along the road, the camera shifts up, and in the distance we see a castle, ominous and menacing on the horizon, a small, twisted fortress clinging tenaciously to a steep Carpathian hillside. We see the carriages, darkened and shadowed, shuttered on both sides, pull up to the castle's rear portal. The still disoriented guests of Lord Claudius Giovanni dragged out of their cramped quarters as the doors to the carriage open, and are roughly handled by these men, still in chains, escorted briskly inside the castle by a dozen guards with brightly blazing torches. Each of you flinch instinctively away from the harsh light of the torches and the terrifying flame that it represents, your beasts not allowing you to get any closer to it than you may. Do any of you go along compliantly, or do any of you resist and try to make a run for it?
Valentino sees this as a possible opportunity to make a new connection with someone he might have something in common with, so he's going along compliantly.
Yeah, Diego's going compliantly as well. He wants to see what's going to happen.
Julieta follows along with these guards, but she holds what integrity she has left with her, and she kind of pulls her arms away from them somewhat, and it's quite clear there's a stubborn streak in her in this moment where she just wants to get where they need to be.
Gehrman will he will reluctantly go along, following the soldiers. He wishes to speak with this new person because clearly he and his former hosts are not allies.
And as the four of you are ushered along, you notice that Mariana is being dragged, still unconscious, or perhaps even dead, in her chains, her little naked feet dragging lines in the earth and then across the stone, covered in blood and other bodily functions and dirt, looking as a... And yet, even covered in all that filth as she is, there is something serene, almost Madonna-like about her face in her repose. But that quickly moves from your mind as you're escorted down a narrow, winding stairway once you enter the main keep of the castle, this twisted fortress leading to the deepest reaches of the structure, down into the cold earth. You pass by a woman who is looking at you with glittering eyes, smiling menacingly at you. This woman, you get only a glimpse of her, but she is a handsome, middle-aged woman with very long dark hair and bright green eyes. She has a languid and relaxed air about her, creating an oft mesmerizing effect that draws the eye, and despite your current predicament, you can't help but look at her. She's wearing delicate clothes and long ornate necklaces with pendants that are inscribed with symbols that look both menacing and unfamiliar to you. You are dragged along the halls in the flickering torchlight down into the bowels of the castle, and you see another as you pass by. Another woman looking at you as you are dragged by, examining you with interest. This woman is very different, a beautiful, dark-haired woman with vaguely Sicilian features, often dressed in fashions most commonly seen among Italian men. Her narrow blue eyes and sharp features give the impression of a quiet intensity that seems barely contained by her petite frame, either standing quite still or pacing with the energy of some kind of caged lion. And you notice something about her as you pass by. Despite the faintly masculine anima around her, she wields an undeniable sex appeal that is deep and primal, and there is something fascinating about her and terrifying all at once as you are dragged deeper into the bowels of the castle. The guards eventually deposit you in a large, airless cell that is strewn with moldering straw and the lumps of near petrified feces among the shadows. Not animal, but human. You are chained to the wall and fastened into your imprisonment. Two of you are chained... Well, no, actually, all five of you are chained against the far wall in a single line, with a straw strewn across the floor. And Gehrman, you've long been divested of your armor. I should mention, your armor was stripped from you when they took you captive. You were wearing whatever clothes you were wearing underneath. And as the prisoners are chained to the wall and the guards turn to leave you, the heavy thud of the door closes behind them. You realize that dawn is very close. Much of the night was also spent getting here to this twisted fortress. You don't know how you know that dawn will soon be upon you, but there is something deep inside you that does know and fears. The cell appears to be on the lowest level of the castle, and though this is true, there is a small slit of a window high up in the wall across from you, and the moonlight is the only thing that illuminates this chamber, spilling down, running the length of the cell, and hitting the wall some feet above your heads. I'm going to turn the scene over to the four of you as you find yourself, for the first time in a long time, left alone to contemplate as you are left amongst each other.
Valentino speaks up, knowing that he can't move very far. He tries to call out so the whole group can hear. I think it is in our best interest to oblige them.
So the floor is yours, guys.
Oh, sorry, my mic was muted. Valentino speaks up, and he tries to speak knowing that he can't move his head very far, so he's trying to speak loud enough for everyone to hear. I think it is best for us to oblige them, their requests. Surely we can find allies in this group against our previous captors.
Gman will slowly nod his head. I agree. However, I must notify the church. They are our greatest ally.
I do not know if we will be seeing any churches very soon.
Julietta is kind of standing in the corner of this cell, and she's listening to...
Oh, no, you're not standing. I'm sorry. I should have iterated that. You guys are definitely sitting upon the floor, and your arms are shackled above you, and like you're fastened to the wall.
Oh, okay then. Well, she is sitting shackled on the floor. She's just kind of listening to Gman and Valentino talking amongst themselves, and her eyes kind of linger over to Diego, taking in what he's doing.
Diego seems lost in his own thoughts right now. Although, when he does feel Julietta's eyes upon him, he does look up. He looks more than anything sad.
Julietta's features somewhat soften to the Spaniard, as she remembers he is the first one she spoke to on this adventure, and now they're here in this dungeon, and it all seems so surreal to her now. But she takes in his demeanor, and she kind of gives him an expression on her face as if she understands exactly how he feels.
Maybe we're dead after all, he says. Our bodies just don't know it yet.
So, do any of you wish to engage in conversation for the rest of the night, or do you fall silent?
Julietta will probably speak up at some point to Gman. Are we demons, Father?
The question hits Gman quite hard. This is something he's been pondering the entire ride over, and yet he refused to speak up and give it voice. But when the young girl asks him in all sincerity, he kind of goes wide-eyed. He kind of stumbles over his words a little. I would not believe that our father has forsaken us so, child.
Julietta would kind of look to the side. Well, I could understand why he would forsaken me. But you, Father? She kind of trails off.
Gman kind of smiles for the first time in a long time. He loves all his children equally. And he kind of gives her a smile.
And even as you say this, Gman, those words ring hollow against the hunger which is still gnawing deep inside you. That dark, monstrous appetite.
Julieta, when she hears Gman say this, a small tear begins to form in her eyelid, and eventually it'll drop down, but she doesn't realize that it's blood, unless someone points it out to her. But eventually she would let that tear kind of trickle down her cheek, and it'll land on her chest, and she looks down at her chest at the blood. But she doesn't speak of that. She only speaks of her son now and says, I came to Lord Giovanni to save my son, and now look where I am.
Valentino looks up, and if he can, he will point out, My lady, you weep tears of blood. I believe the father was only half correct. I believe God abandons equally.
I believe this now too.
Looking up, Gman kind of jerks his head to the side, looking over. He would never abandon us. Ever. He merely puts tests. That must be it. He must be testing us.
And as you
testing
speak,
our resolve.
As you speak loudly, Gman, you hear a banging on the door, and you hear voices on the other side of the door, a voice in particular. The guards yelling for you to be quiet, or else we'll take the fire to you, you hell-damned bloodsuckers. Do you fall silent, or how does everyone react?
Julieta kind of... I'm sorry.
I was just saying Valentino quiets down.
Go ahead, Sam.
Julieta kind of jumps when they slam their fists against their fists and their weapons against the door and demand them to be quiet, and eventually she tilts her cheek to the side and wipes away the blood tear against her shoulder blade, which is still bare because her clothes are all ripped and torn from the events of the day prior, and she's still dirty and she smells of earth and death, but she too quiets after that.
How about Diego or Gman?
Gman kind of glares the door at the men banging on it, and he slowly starts leaning back and props his back and his head up against the wall, and just kind of closes his eyes, and he'll fall silent.
Do you think it's funny how they call us demons? Do they not know that their master is like us?
What level, what volume are you saying this, Diego?
About the same volume I just used. A soft talking.
Okay. Does anyone answer Diego's question, or does everyone fall silent?
Valentino's still silent.
Gman,
I'm sorry, what did he ask? I'm so sorry, I didn't hear that.
He asked if anyone else thought it was funny that they were calling us demons when clearly they're masters like we are now.
Oh, okay.
Gman will kind of turn his head over to Diego with his eyes still closed, but he won't speak. It's more of a acknowledgement of what he was saying.
Julieta, she keeps her face forward looking at the door, but her eyes go to the right over to Diego just for a moment. But she doesn't respond to his question. She merely sits there in quiet contemplation and sadness.
And with that, we're going to fast forward unless anybody else wants to say something or do something.
Valentina's last words for the group tries to get a whisper loud enough for everyone to hear, but still quietly. If anyone comes to speak with us, let me do the talking. I've been in some difficult negotiations. I'll see if I could have us at least released from these chains.
Diego legitimately looks at Valentino like he's grown a second head.
Valentino's quiet the rest of the night.
All right, and with that, when you fast forward time. Nope. All right. So, the rest of the night progresses. It's only a few hours before dawn. And as the morning progresses, the minute the sun crests the horizon, all four of you feel the overwhelming urge to sleep. You feel drunk and tired, and yet something inside you won't allow you to sleep, because the minute the dawn rises, a beam of sunlight slices through the window high up on the wall, through that small slit, painting the wall just a few feet above your head. Your beasts won't allow you to sleep, staring at that daylight so close to it. Although you feel exhausted, you feel the weight of some supernatural fatigue upon you, you're unable to sleep, for your beast is so afraid that instinct deep inside you, you find yourself unable to do anything but stare at that beam of light which paints the wall just a few feet above your heads. And as the morning progresses, as the minutes drift into hours, a slim beam of sunlight knifes through the dusty air, and that sunlight eases down the wall. At first, it landed above your characters' heads, as I said, but as morning waxes into noon, it slowly inches down the wall towards you. As the day and the sun moves across the sky, so too does the beam of sunlight inch slowly down towards your heads in a malevolent wave, a hot, terrifying wave of fire towards all of you. Everyone go ahead and make a courage roll. Difficulty 7, to see how you respond to this realization, this impending sunlight that is inching towards all of you where you're chained up. We're going to look first at Gman as the camera shifts to him. Gman, as you just come to the realization that this sunlight is inching towards you.
He begins to kind of shriek down as low as he can away from it, being held by the chains. He's going to see if he can't kind of pull at the chains a little bit to get some slack, as he feels like he needs to stay away from this.
The camera shifts to Diego.
Diego looks at the shaft of sunlight as if he's never seen one before, and his eyes go wide. He can't move much, but he does crawl back against the wall as much as he can.
Valentino.
Sorry.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't.
Yeah, not knowing why was all I was going to say, because it's just the sun.
Yeah, it's once a friendly thing, once a good thing. It is now clearly filling you with terror, and the camera is going to shift to Valentino.
Valentino definitely recognizes this as a significant threat, and he naturally curves away from it, but he's maintaining a stiff upper lip, trying to not show any fear if any were to look at him.
How is Julietta responding as the camera looks to her?
Julietta doesn't completely lose it, but the fear is eminent on her facial expressions as she kind of narrows her hues at the shifting haze of light upon the wall, and her fangs kind of extend, and the faintest hiss kind of comes out of her mouth as she kind of backs as much as she possibly can against this wall and curves her body into it. She instinctively knows that it's something, she can't be near this light.
The sunlight continues to inch down the wall, one painful, agonizing minute at a time. Over the next hour, and then the next 2, and then the next 3, the beam of sunlight paints the wall, clearly moving down closer and closer until it stops a full 5 feet above the floor. Some of you who are more taller will be forced to slump down uncomfortably in your bonds for over 2 hours. Your head inches away from the sunlight, smoking at the skin as it rolls off of you in thick clouds, in full fear at what might happen should that deadly sunlight touch you. You are able to avoid harm despite that, and as the afternoon waxes into night, you find yourself completely exhausted, body and mind, unable to have been given rest throughout the day, for that menacing daylight fades away as the evening dips into the next night. Many of you, all of you, are unharmed, though the threat of that daylight was clear, and the torture behind it has only just begun. After the long day finally ends and the moon has risen over this castle that you have been brought to, you see the door slamming open as we shift scene. No. Now let's go with this. Sorry guys, still learning this music. Okay. So as we open our next scene, the door to your cell has slammed open and you see Hardestat stride into the room to announce his arrival. There's a smug look of victory upon his face as he examines his prisoners. And almost ironically, he bows at the waist to the 5 of you. Mariana is still unconscious. You don't know if she's dead, but she has not been able to stir. Well, well, well. Behold the grand conspirators. You will not live to plot against your betters again. The punishment for your crime against the traditions of Cain is a slow, agonizing death by sunlight. But if you truthfully answer my questions, he speaks, showing his fangs just behind his lips, I can offer you a quick and painless death instead. A truly admirable offer, and one I suggest you accept. The things he says baffle you, as you're not conspirators and you have absolutely no idea what he's talking about when he says traditions of Cain. Do any of you speak up, or do you remain silent after he speaks?
Valentino immediately speaks up, given the chance. My lord, I can assure you, we are no conspirators, and if there is anything of the matter amiss, We are more closely resembling your allies. Our previous captors were to see us.
Immediately you are cut off, Valentino, as Hardestat roars with laughter. And he slaps you full across the face with the back of his gauntleted hand. A heavy bit of armor encrusted with razor-sharp metal spikes drawing scratches across your face as he cuts you off mid-sentence with the slap. You conspirators are such pathetically amusing little liars. And as he cuts off Valentino, you see others filing into the cell after him. A collection of fascinating individuals that captivate you despite your terrifying circumstances, the captivity which has been put upon you. The first one is a man that draws your eye no matter what has happened up until now. Even you, Valentino, find your eye affixed upon him as he enters the room. What do you think, Raphael? Hardestat says to him as you see a gorgeous, medium-boned Spaniard with a mellifluous voice as he replies, I am not sure. As Raphael de Corazon's beauty is radiant enough to make other Canaanites forget the lost sun. His clothing, his sartorial splendor, is clearly up to date, tasteful, and of the finest tailoring. You take notice of him right away, and you can't help but stare. You've never, not in your life, seen a more beautiful man. Raphael has a surpassing eloquence about him, and he has the confidence of a man who moves adeptly in social situations, although there is something cold and calculating behind the smile that he affixes you with. Just behind him, you see the women that you had glimpsed the night before, addressed as Mistress Fanchon and Adonna de Sforza, as they look you over. And just behind them, entering the room as well, ghostly, with a haunting light about her, you see a tall, blonde woman, very tall for her sex, a rosy-cheeked English woman with glittering eyes that seem almost dreamy, giving a certain haunting quality to her lovely face. She titters nurturingly at the six of you. She approaches Mariana and reaches down to grasp the dead girl's face. Poor baby, she purrs, before her fingers tighten and her attitude flips. I'd like to rip her face off! She hisses, something demonic flashing in her eyes before the mother returns again, and she strokes Mariana's cheek. We must nurse her, Hardestat. We must give her blood. Back, Camilla, Hardestat commands her, and though not quickly, as a trained dog might, Camilla acquiesces and withdraws. Just behind, near the doorway, if anyone is looking there, you see a tall, lanky, shadowy silhouette of a man that eventually steps into the cell, the moonlight illuminating him. A man addressed by the others as Milov. He's very slim with shaggy blonde hair and a young man with wide, piercing blue eyes. His sinewy frame and quiet gaze sends a chill through you, menacing like the coming of some distant storm. Milov appears the very image of contained power. He takes in every movement and sound in this room, the finely tuned senses of one for whom the world has been neatly divided into predator and prey. And finally, the last is a little shadow, a tiny, hunched, stooped figure of a man. You think perhaps it might be a man, as though he were some creature rather than a person. A stooped, wizened man, just shy of 5 feet tall. The tattered wreckage of what was once his face mark him as a Canite. A monster. More monstrous than any of those around him, his visage twisted, a part of his face illuminated by the moonlight. Huge, suppurating clusters of warts cover large patches of his skin, and his eyes appear glassy, roomy, and milk white. So these are the conspirators, he hisses, low in the darkness. A tiny, hunched man that nonetheless radiates a sense of menace. Indeed, Hardestat intones, walking down the line solicitously, looking at each of your predicaments. My. But those pustules in your belly must take some getting used to. He motions where each of you were stuck by the iron pokers of his guards. But you wear them well, you do. Oh dear, were my guards just a trifle overzealous? Perhaps you should have stood up to greet the sun this past morning and had done with it. But I see you're all still alive. As he moves down the line, the camera's going to focus on each of you. As I turn the scene over to all four of you briefly to take in this gathering of these individuals of both fascinating and repulsive as they examine you.
Valentino again tries to speak up. My lords and ladies, there is some great confusion here. We are not conspirators, we were prisoners to our previous hosts, and now we again are prisoners. We are not privy to whatever conspiracy you believe us to be.
Gman will pipe up with the word victims.
Hardestat, it appears to allow you to be speaking now, looking at all the four of you that are still conscious with a curiously menacing smile on his face.
Would Julietta be able to use one of her specialties, like instinctually at this point?
If you like, it's up to you what you want to do in this scene.
I can say out loud what one I want to use, right? Or do I have to text you or message you?
Yeah, it's on your character sheet, so just let me know over Skype.
Okay. She's going to try and do something.
You can say what kind of roll you want to make. If, that'll make it easy. Because I can look at your sheet. I see which specialties you have. Oh, that's not a specialty. That's a discipline.
Well, yeah, whatever, that.
Yeah, you guys can declare anytime what disciplines you're using, what level, and yeah, it's fine.
Oh, okay. Well, as Julietta is taking all this in, she finds herself honing in on these people, and she's going to try and use her aspects to see if there's something about these individuals that remind her of the ones before.
Okay, which level of aspects are you using?
Her full level. Can I just say it out loud?
Yes.
Okay, 2.
Okay.
Okay.
Roll your perception empathy, difficulty 8, and that's gonna cost you a blood point, I believe.
Okay. Just perception and empathy?
Yep.
Okay.
Julietta, as you open your mind and your consciousness to the individuals gathered around you, you begin to see something quite magnificent, something quite fascinating, as you see an aura begin to emanate from each of their skins, and though you can't see the color, the aura. You think perhaps you might see flickers of color. It's not enough to get enough information. You do see that all of their auras are pale, and they are most certainly not human.
When Julieta picks up on these auras, and she kind of starts to realize that these are not humans, her eyes kind of linger over to Gman, and she speaks over to him, and she doesn't hide what she says. She says to him, plain as day, "They are demons, Father."
Valentino's going to try to again persuade this group of people gathered before them that they're genuinely not conspirators and were prisoners. I'm going to use presence, so I'm going to send you a roll.
Okay, well, first you want to activate awe. So that is going to be a blood point, plus charisma performance, difficulty 7. Ooh. All right, as you... Gosh. Poor Valentina. Okay, go ahead and make your roll afterwards. What roll did you want to use after that?
I was going to try and convince them to let us out of the chains, because they could believe we were not conspirators and that we could be allies instead.
Okay, so probably charisma expression.
Okay.
Go ahead and roll your charisma expression. Difficulty is going to be 9. No, that's a social roll, so you can make that openly. Remember, guys, anything that is just mental is private. Social and physical is public. So you can roll that 10 again. Okay, well, you managed to get their attention, Valentino, with your pleading, and one of them even looks at you. It's the one they call Mistress Fanchon. She is kind of looking at you with a mix of interest and detached bemusement, and you realize to your horror, Valentino, that none of these monsters are moved by your words. Very clearly, none of them have taken you seriously at all. How does Valentino react when his pleading is falling upon deaf ears, apparently?
A kind of quiet fear grows in him. This has kind of been his forte, is negotiating better arrangements, and in the most dire circumstance when he really needs to succeed, he's fallen flat completely in front of this whole group. He's humiliated and definitely fearful of his failure.
And what is Diego doing?
What would you have us do? He asked directly.
I would have you tell us the truth, Hardestat says, as he examines you.
We were invited to dinner, at which we were to be made dinner.
Well, if that is so, he speaks, why were you embraced?
To distract you.
Such a clever ruse. And he turns to his companions. And what of my boon companions? What Do you think that wretched toad, Claudius Giovanni, would be crafty enough to place spies in our ranks with this ruse? And it's the woman called Adonna di Sforza who speaks up. I do not think Claudius had an original thought in his head. But it is possible. And at that, Hardestat nods, before he turns his attention back upon the five of you. Don't worry, my little prisoners. You will have an opportunity to answer our questions. And what follows is he pauses before looking over at Gman and studying Gman a bit closer than the others. And what about you, Crusader? I have sources that tell me you know something about interrogation yourself.
Gman just kind of slumps his head back onto the wall and looks up at him. I know enough.
I want that one for myself, Hardestat says, looking pointedly at Gman, where he lays slumped against the wall. Oh, that is not fair. Adonna speaks. He is my blood. I should be permitted to investigate him. Hardestat glances sidelong at Adonna, shaking his head. No, it is personal. And you wonder, Gman, what could possibly be personal between you and this monstrous man, this demon wearing a man's flesh that you've never met before. And with a beckon of his hand, Hardestat has you unlatched and hauled out of the room by his men. Adonna turns to look at the others, pursing her lips as she looks you over. I will take that one. She points towards Giulietta, speaking perfect Italian. If I cannot have my blood, I will have my countrymen. And with a nod, Hardestat beckons for Giulietta to be unlatched from the wall and dragged away, and you are, Giulietta, taken away at Adonna's request, and she follows after you, exiting the cell, leaving Diego and Valentino in the unconscious form of Mariana. Diego, immediately you see that beautiful man, Raphael, they had called him. He has been examining you this entire time, looking at you from a distance, or saying, "That one." And he motions to you, and immediately, without even having to say so, some of the men enter the room and unlatch you and take you away, leaving behind only Mariana and Valentino. And as Valentino is one of the last left behind, you see Camilla immediately move forward, the blonde woman, with a simpering smile. No, give this one to me, Hardestat. I would love to make him suffer. She hisses with her fangs extended and grab you by the face, Valentino. Mistress Fanchon waves a hand. Well, we can't have a moon-mad child of Malkav investigating this matter, Hardestat. Give him over to my questioning. Hardestat considers this for a moment, your fate hanging in the balance, Valentino. And as the camera looks at you, what is he doing? As Valentino is decided over.
Valentino's looking back and forth at the two new would-be captors of him. And he kind of quietly mutters, I have nothing left to give. I am surely drained of whatever blood I had at this point.
Mistress Fanchon, he is yours. Hardestat intones coldly, like a judge passing sentence. And immediately the woman nods, and Camilla steps back with a disappointed look upon her lovely face. Although you think perhaps it's the look of someone who genuinely wishes. She looks down at you. She even blows you a kiss as the soldiers come in and haul you away. And as you are dragged out of the cell, we're going to shift scene. We open our next scene in a chamber where Guerman de Gascoigne is currently chained against the wall. The circumstances reversed. He's so many times before been on the other end of this interrogation, and he finds himself shackled to the wall in this dungeon. And indeed, the tables have turned as you see Guerman, the farmer that you had been torturing back at Lord Claudius Giovanni's manor, enters the room to your shock, entering the torchlight and passing beneath it. And he points a finger at you just as Hardestat enters the room just behind him, the finger of an accuser. That is the one, my lord. That is the one who stretched me. Hardestat looks you over coldly. Did you know that you were torturing my spy, conspirator? Hardestat speaks softly, but with a demanding tone.
I was not aware he was your man. I was under the guise that he was Giovanni's.
Hardestat smirks. Your lies are going to need better work than that if we're going to move forward, churchman. Also in the chamber, Guerman, you notice a huddled form in the corner in the darkness. An old withered-looking woman. You think perhaps that's what she is, but you can't see her very well. In heavy skirts and shawls, sitting in the corner. Hardestat approaches you and grips you by the face, looking you over. If you just tell me the truth now, your death will be quick and painless. Confess, churchman. Consider me your priest. Hardestat gets almost an inch from your face, and you see his fangs as he says the word priest.
Guerman is going to remain silent and just shrug his jaw away from his hands.
And as you shrug your jaw out of his grip, Hardestat roars at you. I demand to know! I demand to know everything. Everything you know, and I will pull the truth from your lips. Who are the conspirators' identities? What are their clans? What are the details of their plot?
Guerman just takes a moment as he hangs his head. It is the blind leading the blind down here. I know nothing of what you speak.
Impatiently, Hardestat jerks his hand, and you hear the crank being turned as one of his assistants pull the chains upward. They slide through the shackles in the wall. And quickly, the spy, Hardestat's spy that you had tortured, he crosses the room and unshackles the iron manacles on the wall, and they come undone, and you find yourself stretched and pulled by your wrists, suspended above the floor as your toes leave the ground. There's many torture devices in this room. You know what awaits you, Hardestat, better than most. There's a hot forge, a hot brazier against the far wall where irons are being heated. Hardestat approaches the brazier and grabs one of the hot iron pokers, the tip glowing red, and immediately your beast seizes in fear, even if the rest of you is calm, knowing what is coming. Hardestat approaches you with the glowing end of that iron-shod poker and brings it just inches above your naked chest. Tell me something, Crusader. Tell me a detail of their plot.
Garmin looks very flustered, and he's very just staring at the hot poker, and he looks very beside himself as he just stares at it and tries to push himself back, but the wall is stopping him. I don't know what you want me to say!
And without even hesitating, he plunges the hot poker in your chest, immediately burning you with unimaginable agony as the iron pierces your skin. Make a courage roll, Gehrman. Difficulty will be 7 as your beast howls in agony. As he plunges this into your flesh, and the camera focuses in on Gehrman as he's suspended above the floor. Go ahead and describe for us what we're seeing.
The moment the poker touches his chest, his head shoots back and slams up against the stone wall as his teeth are bared and his now fangs are extended, and screams echo throughout the dungeon as he bellows with pain, racking his body, trying to pull at the chains with all of his might, crying out.
The hot poker immediately sizzles your dead flesh as it is extinguished in your guts, boiling the blood that comes spilling out as he withdraws the hot poker, and Hardestat admires his work. I want names, Crusader. Names.
Names. At the banquet.
Yes.
His brain is racing. He's very flustered with pain and the agony of the poker. Giovanni and Marquetus.
Marquetus?
That demon is the one that did this to me, as he shakes the chains and kind of pulls forward.
Very good. Hardestat speaks softly, wiping the blood away from the tip of the iron poker, still smoking hot. We will see how much you know before the night is out. Hardestat turns and places the poker back into the brazier. As we shift scene once more, we open in another scene, another part of this castle, another chamber, as you are dragged bodily into this room. There's a single iron chair in the center, illuminated by a beam of moonlight. Overhead, you can see there's a iron grate just above your head, which allows the moonlight to spill into this iron chair. Although you know if this were daylight, that chair would be a hot inferno of sunlight. You are placed forcibly into the chair, and the shackles are bound tightly around your wrists as the one who calls himself Raphael de Corazon, that beautiful Spaniard, stands just out of the circumference of the moonlight and looks at you, his eyes glittering menacingly and somehow still beautiful in his deadly grace, kind of beauty of some deadly predator, a beauty best observed from a distance as you are shackled into that chair, and the soldiers turn to leave. The camera focuses in on Diego. How is he? What are we seeing?
He looks on Raphael appraisingly. What he told Sire Wenceslas, or however you pronounce it, about being someone who prefers males is not necessarily true, but he can appreciate male beauty. And he is wondering what someone who looks like this is possibly going to do to him.
Despite your preference for the fairer sex, you have never seen, as I said, a more beautiful man before. There's something about him that's supernaturally captivating. He's just gorgeous, and the way his hair seems to fall and frame his lovely face, and the way the shadows play over him, you can't take your eyes off of him.
As an architect, seeing something so this well put together, I'm thinking he might even become entranced by it.
Okay, fair enough. Self-control. Difficulty's gonna be 6. Absolutely, and something comes over you, Diego, threatens to come over you, and yet you still manage to shake it off and remember the circumstances of your captivity. You manage to shake whatever it was that threatened to overwhelm your senses. You still maintain your mind, but you do have a hard time trying to tear away your eyes from him, if at all.
And he says, almost without meaning to, it slips from his mouth, "You are the most perfect specimen of manhood I have ever seen."
The Spaniard smiles, just a twitch at one corner of his perfect lips that can seem both cruel and inviting all at the same time, as he strides forward, his lovely angular face illuminated by the beams of moonlight that trail overhead, and he reaches out to place his hand over yours where it rests on the arm of the chair. "What is your name, my friend?" he asks you in perfect Spanish.
Diego Vasquez de Sevilla.
I see. And how is it that this came to happen to you?
I was offered an invitation to attend a dinner at the mansion of Lord Claudius Giovanni. I thought it was a chance to improve my fortunes. But instead he made me this that you see before you.
Lord Giovanni himself did this to you?
No. Sire Wenceslas, I believe was his name. A crazy old loon of a man.
Raphael nods approvingly. Wenceslas. Yes, I know of this man. Can you tell me more of any who were there at the banquet?
I would ask you to promise me that you won't kill me, but it's not a request you would grant, I think.
Raphael immediately interrupts your words with a soft snap of his fingers, and for some reason the words die in your throat as he just snaps his fingers an inch before your nose, and he, with a single finger, strangely domineering in his mannerisms, he tilts your chin towards him, forces you to look up at his lovely pale face and his glittering eyes in the moonlight. I asked you a question, Senor. Go on and tell me, who else was at this banquet?
There was a Lady Theophana.
Lady Theophana, can you describe this Lady Theophana?
She was a slip of a girl, no more than perhaps 14 years of age, but she seemed far older than she looked.
Raphael nods, knowingly, thinking.
I heard other names too. One's not in attendance. Cappadocius. Japheth, Cappadocius, he says.
They spoke of Cappadocius.
They spoke of attacking him.
Attacking Cappadocius or Japheth?
Japheth. They call him... I thought Cappadocius was perhaps his homeland.
Raphael nods approvingly, and a rat just at this moment skitters across the floor, and almost effortlessly Raphael leans down to scoop it up into his hands, gripping it tightly and yet with a kind of gentle touch that surprises you. His fingers stroke over the rat's fur as he walks over to you. You see him effortlessly crack the vermin's neck and pluck its head off as though it were the cap to a wine bottle. Open your mouth, my friend. You have earned a reward.
What?
Open your mouth. And Raphael's voice is so soft and sinuous that you can't help but obey.
Even so, he looks into Raphael's eyes as this is happening.
He touches his fingertips to your jaw, stroking almost sensuously your jawline as he opens the hinge of your mouth, and he uses his other hand to squeeze the warm rat blood into your mouth. And though it at first tastes vile, as it crashes over your tongue and he milks this dead beast into your open lips, you feel sustenance, sweet and rich and ripe, and you find yourself aching for more.
What have they done to me?
Raphael withdraws the dead rat and casts the carcass off into the shadows. He wipes his hand upon your tunic, almost as if an afterthought. They have embraced you into the clan of the Rose, Diego Vasquez de Sevilla. They have made you a Canite, one of my blood, in fact.
What does that mean? I don't understand.
Canite, the word you may recognize is vampire.
And he crinkles his brow at that. It's a story.
Many stories have their roots in truth, Diego. And regardless of what you believe, my friend, that is what you are.
At once I want to laugh in your face, but then the evidence of my eyes, it deceives me.
I know. And Raphael pats your cheek almost affectionately, or perhaps some parody of therein. I know. You are confused now, but all will be made clear to you before long. Now about this banquet. And he trails off. As we shift scene once more, and we open our next scene into a room where we see Giulietta being dragged by soldiers into a room where there is an iron bench in the very center. The bench has been affixed into the stone floor. And we see the vampire which had asked for you. See Adonna Disfolza, svelte and sleek and attractive, with her short, cropped black hair and her narrow, angular face, looking down at you, pale as the moonlight that spills through the single window, iron-barred as it is, illuminating you as the guards strap you to your back, on the back of the bench, with your arms hanging over both sides extended. They put shackles on both of your wrists and chain those shackles to the floor, extended by short chains, stretching you out in a crucifixion pose atop that bench. And as they do, Adonna, strides around you, reaching down with pale hands to test the tautness of the chains that bind your wrists to the floor. Is everything quite comfortable for you, Lady Julieta?
Quite, she says, almost sarcastically.
That is good. I would hate to think that your comforts were being infringed upon. Lord Hardestat and his hospitality are regrettable. I apologize for any mistreatments. Adonna reaches out and strokes her fingertips across the holes in your belly where you had been stuck by Hardestat's men. He is a brute, but these are brutish times. What can you tell me about what happened in that house, Lady Julieta? She's speaking to you in perfect Italian, so vivid that you almost feel home for a moment.
Julieta is kind of has a far off gaze as she's circling around her and talking, but it does bring her back to this place once more when she hones in on her Italian and her accent, and it does for a moment make her nostalgic for Florence, and she kind of swallows a dry lump. Even though there is no dry lump, it's almost out of necessity. But finally, after a minute or so, she looks over to her and she says, I have nothing to hide. What do you wish to know?
She nods, your captor, thinking on this. I would like to think that is true, Julieta. I would like to think that you are cooperative. But where are my manners? Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Adonna di Sforza. I was the daughter of nobility, but no longer. And you have the look of a courtesan about you. Her eye is impeccable as you realize she has picked you out perfectly, Julieta.
I was indeed. For many years, she says.
Is that what brought you to Lord Giovanni's manor tonight?
Among other things, she says.
And let us speak of those other things, Adonna says, almost vaguely menacingly as she walks around you, circling you like an animal. She remains just outside the circumference of the moonlight, drifting in and out of the shadows, and you see her glittering eyes in the moments when she passes by your head.
Julieta watches her, rather fixated, but she regains her composure after a moment and speaks up once more. I was there, looking to see if I could acquire the Lord's help. She keeps her answer kind of vague at first.
I see. Donna speaks. And what sort of help would you require?
Well, she hesitates. She's trying to think of how she can answer this without giving too much away. I was having some trouble with the Medicis. And as you know, well, as most know, the Giovannis are not very fond of them.
So you would go to their enemies for succor?
I would.
And what happened in that manner? How did this come to be put upon you, this state you are in?
For a second, she's kind of relieved that the conversation has shifted to what has happened to her rather than why she was there in the first place. She doesn't want to give anyone information about her son. So after a moment, she lifts her chin rather confidently and she says, "Well, it seemed Lord Giovanni wanted me to be quite acquainted with some woman, some crazy woman. Her name was Lady Theophana."
Can you describe this Lady Theophana for me?
She was young, perhaps 15 or so. Short hair, wearing a very ragged-looking gown.
She may have appeared that way, Giulietta de Florence, but I assure you, she is much older than 15. What do you know of what has happened to you?
She hesitates a second, kind of looking about the room, and it's almost hard for her to say the words out loud, but she eventually says, "We have been turned into demons, haven't we?"
And as you look around the room, Giulietta, make a self-control roll.
Julietta is starting to have the fear creep into her once more, and um, she fights the urge to frantically look about for some way to escape, even though she has this undeniable feeling that this woman who's circling her and asking her these questions means to do harm to her.
What is going on in that wild-eyed head of yours? Adonna speaks softly as she sees your eyes widen. Not enough to act, but she seems to have sensed the fear in you. What madness has Theophana poured into your head? Poor child of Malkav. And what are we seeing as the camera shifts to Giulietta?
She kind of her chest kind of sinks in, and she is feeling very, very afraid, and she's not sure, what's going on or who to trust, and even though she had her composure intact only seconds ago, now it's gone, and as quickly as it was there, it has vanished, and she's never felt this way before. She's never felt so out of control. And immediately she looks back over to Adonna and says, "You wish to kill me?"
Is that what you think?
"Yes," she says, kind of frantically.
Adonna's slender, sculpted brow raises in mild indifference. Perhaps. That is yet to be seen. And with that, the camera fades out into blackness as we unfortunately end this session. Gosh, I'm sorry, Vukar. I meant to get to your scene, but it's like past 2 now.
No worries.
We'll definitely start with you first thing next week. So that's the end of today's session, guys.